pretty sneaky. Ready? Okay. Okay, I would like to call to order, please, the City of St. Helena regular City Council meeting, Tuesday, November 26th, 2019. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Where's the flag? Yeah. No, that's California.
Mr. City Manager, any? Okay, there you go. You're fired.
We all know what it looks like.
There's one there.
There you go. Yeah, there's one right there. Yeah. How about that?
All right, should we go with that one? All right, here we go.
Okay.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Good eye. Okay, we'll move on to our roll call.
Mayor Ellsworth?
Here.
Vice Mayor Doreen?
Here.
Councilmember Koberstein?
Here.
Chateau?
Here.
And Councilmember Knudsen is absent.
Okay, we'll move on to our public forum. This is an opportunity for members of the public to speak on matters of municipal concern not on the agenda during public forum. Each person's comments shall be limited to 4 minutes. Each person is entitled to speak on any non-agendized item only once at any meeting. And brief questions by council members for clarifications may be posed and answered, and council members may make requests that items be placed on future agendas. But in accordance with state law, no substantive discussion or action may take place unless and until the matter properly appears on the agenda. Is there any public comment at this point?
Good evening. I'm Michael Merriman. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm here to represent a group of avid dog park users and ask that the City Council take a look at making some upgrades to both maintenance and facilities that are currently at the St. Helena Dog Park. Many of you know where the dog park is, but it's sort of amazing that there are lots and lots of people in town that don't know where it is. It's not very visible on the internet. We do have people that come very often to the dog park and say, I didn't know this was here. I had a hell of a time finding it. And that points to awareness and signage, of which there is no signage. So we started a dialogue with Parks and Rec early in the summer, and Parks and Rec was kind enough to set aside some time for meetings with us all at the dog park to hear what we would like to see happen. Suggestions were made, notes were made, and that's pretty much where it stands now. Very little has been done to move things forward, so I'd like the council to consider asking that maybe staff look into it and see what they can do about getting some things accomplished. One thing that we did arrange for, because we were told that there were plans and money in a budget for a shade structure in the park, I approached Howard Backen, and he kindly agreed to design a shade structure. And I don't know if the city ever followed up on that, but that opportunity shouldn't be ignored or let go fallow. So I guess in closing, I'd just like to ask the City Council to consider moving things forward. The City Council, I don't know if it's aware, but staff certainly is. And I'd just like to see some forward movement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there additional public comment?
Good evening, City Council. Susan Kenward here, 1261 Springbrook Court. I'm here tonight to encourage you to issue the RFP for a small hotel on Adams Street. If you would refer back to last May on the record, you have more speakers and letter writers urging you to move forward than were opposed. But in the face of a vocal opposition, a majority of you decided to put the RFP on hold until you could see all the cost estimates for the city hall and more. Now that the costs are pouring in, they are significant, and as we delay finding solutions, one thing is certain: the cost will only increase. I want you to know that there are many residents besides myself who want to move forward. The citizens of St. Helena have been battling it out on Adams Street for a decade or more. We need a supportive community and council that puts the greater good for all above our individual priorities, one that addresses the realities of today and the needs of tomorrow. It is evident that a hotel on Adams would ensure long-term economic stability for the city and help pay for some of our much-neglected infrastructure needs, possibly help fund an updated library, a community building, and maybe even a decent working environment for our corporate yard. But beyond the wish for the new and improved city infrastructure, we also have a struggling downtown. Pop-ups are filling some of the empty storefronts, but they are not permanent solutions. For this, we need a smart, sustainable economic development strategy that supports businesses and workers and benefits the city and all the residents into the future. Through the 2018 Downtown Market Study, we learned that St. Helena's demographics are currently insufficient to support our businesses. To address this issue, Cosmont recommended that we consider a luxury hotel on Adams precisely because it is close and walkable to downtown. We don't have a business-friendly reputation. There is a let's wait and see sentiment in the community. We need to turn the conversation from do nothing to invest in our future. And we need to find the right partners to work with to go forward in a responsible and sustainable manner. We can either continue to drift or we can move forward. So far, drift has not been particularly pretty. And there creative ways for a developer we could work with the city to create a small hotel on Adams Street property that would benefit both the downtown and the city in general? As a community, we will never know until we see a proposal. The draft RFP that was put on hold last May envisioned a significantly smaller hotel on less property than the 2016. It preserved land for public use. It spoke to the importance of sustainable land planning and architectural design, aesthetic character that respects the neighborhoods and community. It preserved walking paths to the river and required a workforce housing needs profile and more. I see no downsides. Maybe we could consider this as a blind date. We should at least look to see whether there is a willing partner who wants to invest in St. Helena, a firm with proven development experience and the financial wherewithal to deliver a project that we define and that has the potential to benefit St. Helena now and for the future. The new finance committee you're going to discuss later tonight may help you determine how to pay for the infrastructure work that must be done, but it does not address the equally important need to revitalize our downtown. As for our largest city asset, Adams Street, they will have to operate on a guesstimate instead of a concrete proposal. But there is no doubt that private investment in a small hotel on Adams Street will not only yield immediate cash infusion, it will support business and deliver a long-term revenue stream for the benefit of the entire city.
Thank you.
I encourage you to do this, and I think that there is a way for almost everyone to get something that they want. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Is there additional public comment?
I'm Anthony McKelly, 1125 Cornella. First, I'd like to wish all the council, mayor, staff a happy Thanksgiving. Last 2 weeks ago, one of the councilmen brought up at the end of talking about Adams Street and different things that somebody emailed them and said that they weren't following the Shape Committee report. So I got 200 pages, the final report from the Shape Committee. And I'd just like to relay what the top items were in that report. And there was no hotel on Adams Street either on that report. But they voted for all these options. And the number one option was to keep City Hall where it was and that was an 8-3 vote. To move City Hall to Adams Street was a 6-5 vote. On the library, it was a 10-1 vote to only do interior renovations to the library. Not to move it, not to do anything else, but yet we spend all this money now on these consultants to do all of that, in which I don't understand why we keep spending money that we don't need. And also, there was a vote on what to do next to the library, and by a 9-2 vote, it was to put the Historical Society there, to put other community projects there. And I recommend, and I'm sure the council has read this 200-page report, but it's specifically what the SHAPE Committee recommended. And I know at the last meeting, Tom Belt brought up that one of the councilmen didn't know of this another committee that was the one that guided the consultants to do all of these 4 proposals, that none of them included the number 1 proposal of the SHAPE Committee to put that on Adams Street. All our buildings in town are full now. The only 1-2 buildings aren't, it's because they're the highest rents in town. And that's the only reason. But there was never anything that I read, because I got that Cosmont report, that said of putting a hotel on Adams. The 6 items that report gave, number 1, the city has to get off this holier-than-thou attitude and negative business for downtown. Number 4 was what the only thing the city has done is the pop-ups. Others were to encourage doing the culinary and other things downtown, but none of them have a hotel on Adams Street that I saw in that Cosmont report, at least as the top 6 items they wish to do. And I just hope the city, I mean, you spent $50,000 on that hotel, on the Vineyard Valley, trying to do that initiative there. You spent $25,000 on the Cosmont report. Why don't we just spend another $30,000 and put it to a vote of the people? That's all we got to do, because you're going to keep running around and nobody's going to, unfortunately, make a decision. And in the end, somebody's probably going to do an initiative to force it to a vote. So, I mean, somebody's got to do something. I mean, I'm just tired of spending money for consultants one after another, and one day we will be broke. It's fortunately, we have a lot of people still wanting to come here that we're still a shining star, and we still can be. And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there any additional public comment? Seeing none, we will move now to reports by staff and city council, future agenda items, and AB 1234 reports. And I will begin with our city attorney.
I don't have a report.
Our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Just an observation that we're very grateful for the rain that arrived today. I like to refer to that as a PSPS mitigation measure, and I'm hopeful that that will mitigate all future PSPS events for several months. It also reflects essentially a change in season, and as you know, our Jingle All the Way event starts this Friday. The website is sthelena.jingle.com. We have information on the calendar about various events that happen each day, and this will be open on Thursdays and Fridays, Saturdays and Sundays.
Thank you. And we'll move to our finance department.
Thank you. Just a reminder that we are going to be switching to bi-monthly billing effective January 1st. And if you have any questions, please contact the finance department and we can answer them for you. And then we are also going to be opening up our fiscal year 2021 nonprofit application process at the beginning of December. Thank you.
Thank you. Our city clerk. Our Public Works Department.
I just want to provide a brief update that on the Upper York Creek and Sulphur Creek bridges, which has been brought in a lot of talk in the city, and the protection and the historic preservation of those 2 bridges. While we provided public comment and verbal comment to Caltrans, we are following up in writing. It might be past the date, but it's the early process in the environmental process. They are already asking me for follow-up questions from the initial stakeholder meeting we had in October, but we will be following up in writing all the concerns the city has.
Very good. Thank you. And our Parks and Rec.
a reminder that next Friday, the 6th of December, we will have our Home for the Holidays event. We started last year. It was well attended, so we want to do that again. That will start at 5:30 in front of the Carnegie Building. It will end at probably around 8 o'clock. And some of the things that we have lined up here are the lighted bike parade that will start at 5 p.m. I believe, Anna, didn't you participate in that last year? So that was a lot of fun. And they will meet at the station at 4:45. It starts at 5. The bikes will arrive at the Carnegie Building at 5:30. Then I have it on good authority that Santa will arrive in a St. fire truck around 6 o'clock. And then after that, he'll meet with kids. We have a big season's greeting sign that will light up in front of the building. Folks can go inside the Carnegie Building. They can make some ornaments. Nimbus Arts is going to have some roller skate shaped ornaments that people can go in and decorate. And then around 7:30, everybody can then start walking over to Lyman Park to decorate the city tree over there as part of the Home for the Holidays portion of Jingle All the Way. And that's it. It's free to attend, and we hope to see everybody out there.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Councilperson Knudsen?
I have two things to add, if I may, and I don't know if this is actually the appropriate moment in time, but if it's not, will someone please tell me it's not? The first is the Pratt Avenue Bridge opening and the potential lane changes, where we had issued a letter on staff to county staff, and it was sort of ignored at the county level. And I wonder if we could do something stronger and to agendize and actually communicate to the supervisors themselves instead of to staff, because we didn't get any play. And that's a desperately important issue for the city. That's one thing.
So, go ahead.
I don't know if I can address that, but I thought the feedback we got was there was not support at the supervisor level to move forward with that.
Right, because the supervisors or supervisor did not hear directly from us. They heard from staff, and it's been brought up to me by the community members that they really, and I think it's sort of imperative. It's aside from the left turn and the bridge itself, everything else is City of Santa Helena thoroughfares, and I just thought we could do something stronger.
For me, I would support a continued conversation, and if there's a way that we can put it out there again and say that we would like this dialogue to continue. What do you have a?
I know we're not on the agenda, but I'd like to agendize this if that's possible.
One thing I talked offline with Councilmember Knudsen about was the concept of a resolution rather than a letter. And if that's something that the council would be interested in, what we can do is agendize this for the following meeting with a draft resolution that essentially itemizes the points that I think were contained in the letter for your consideration.
I would agree with that. It would be nice to get more or continuing anecdotal evidence from folks who have seen near misses or accidents or problems with the bridge. I think we also need accident data or near miss data. We need more objective data, in my view, and that's the feedback that I've received from the supervisor from this district. And so all that information should be brought forward so we can, include that in a resolution, in my estimation.
Then the second item, I've done a lot of constituent services recently, which I'm really happy to do. I'm happy to meet with people. And I said this on my latest meeting to one of the citizens who all of us represent was, I'm hoping that particularly with the holidays here, that we figure out ways to enhance our community rather than to sort of create megaphones that we can, because megaphones are one way, and I'm really hoping for those in this community that we have such a great community if we can continue to have dialogue among us instead of unidirectional. that's all.
Councilperson Chateau?
I'll just report on the neighbor-to-neighbor event that we had with you, Mayor, and also Councilmember Doring showed up. We had 120 people at Grace Church that all came to get neighborhoods organized by neighborhood. It was a great event. I've heard already from Councilmember Knudsen that his neighborhood is organized. I'm hearing lots of positive stories about people taking action in their own neighborhood and getting to know each other more than they did before. So thank you, and reach out to me or Jeff if you want to hear more about it.
Councilperson Koberstein?
Two things. I'd like to follow up on Mr. Merriman's comments and suggest that we get an update from the manager and the Parks and Rec Department about the dog park and what's going on. I recall seeing some emails a couple months ago that there were going to be meetings there, but I think it would be good for us to hear a report. I don't know if this shade structure is something that is in our work program or CIP program for the parks, and it would be useful to know what the estimated cost would be. I think the offer of Mr. Backen to design it is quite a nice thing, and we should sort of pursue this and keep it moving along. So I don't know if anybody else supports that idea, but I think we should follow up.
I like that idea, and I also wonder if, when I heard those comments, is there an overall plan for what they're investing in, which parks and when, and is that something that we could get a report on instead of just hearing about the one?
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Thank you.
Second, and you might talk about this some more, the mayor and I attended a meeting last week, Monday, wasn't it? Of the Up Valley Partnership for Youth, the group that is put together to discuss the issue of vaping in the county and in our city in particular. There are a number of issues, and we should probably agendize this at some point and talk about them, but some of them are sort of outside our purview, like national advertising and things like that. But there may be some things we can do in town. There were suggestions of perhaps some licensing things related to flavored tobacco products, the sale of vaping devices, and I think it would be good for us to know what we can actually do here. But the other takeaway I took is we really need to coordinate with the other cities and the county, because it's kind of a valley trafficking route, as far as if you can't get your product here, you go get it in the next town, or you buy it from somebody who bought it from somebody else. So, but I think we should start by understanding what we can do.
With respect to the vaping issue, on November 12th, the council provided direction to us to look into other amendments to possibly ban the sale of vaping products and related type of issues. And I think it would be important to look at the other cities as well. And in working with our assistant to the city manager, we're anticipating bringing the policy conversation to you in the second meeting in January, after meeting with stakeholders and doing a little due diligence.
Vice Mayor Doring? I've got a few items. First, on the vaping issue, I followed through with one of the facilitators of the meeting today, and one of the things we talked about was the possibility of some type of workshop to get all the possible options on the table. That came up at the meeting last week. So as we head towards wherever we are in January, if it's the second meeting, if there's, I think there's an interest in some type of workshop to look at all the different options, and also how do we communicate with the other cities, that type of thing. So moving forward on that, and it sounds like we have good steps to move forward and good partnerships. So then also I wanted to thank Councilperson Chateau for the remarkable job that she did, along with Gail and Grant Sholey, on putting together the neighbor-to-neighbor network meetings. There were two. There was one at Grace Church and one at the Catholic school that was in Spanish, and a great turnout for both, and a lot of information and a lot of connection. So this is a project we're going to keep working on, and also combines with our fire safe council we're trying to build in town. So anybody that has an interest in participating in those fire safe council or neighbor to neighbor network, please get in touch. The more folks involved, the better. And once again, thank you, Ms. Chateau. I want to keep encouraging people to, we're trying to encourage a culture of bicycle riding and pedestrians here, and so part of that is us as drivers realizing we need to think about how we drive, how we approach intersections, how we come to complete stops at stop signs, particularly in school zones. We need to, as drivers, be participating if we want to have a more bike friendly and pedestrian friendly city. So please keep that in mind as we drive. I went by Brenkel Court today, the self-help housing development over on McCorkle, and that is coming along. And at some point, they may need to ask for or want to ask for more volunteers or more tools, and they'll get back to us. And I let them know that when there might be an interest in that, to let us know. But that's moving forward. And I also met last week with Schools for Climate Action in Napa, young people pushing forward, looking at priorities for dealing with climate change. So that conversation is moving forward, and I believe we have a meeting agendized now in early January for the countywide committee. So that is moving forward as well. So with that, I will then move to our staff briefings, and this will be, we'll start with Upper York Creek Dam. Ms. Smithies.
Thank you. And I do have a quick update. We met with the Regional Water Quality Board and the other regulatory agencies 2 weeks ago and had a much more progressive meeting with them. And the next steps ahead, the consultant's going to have revised 65% plans and permits submitted by early January, the first full week of January, to the agencies. We're also going to submit for on this next meeting, December 10th, a professional services agreement with Britain Tree Services to take down up to 10 trees at the York Creek Dam so we could get in there in hopefully June of next year to start the actual dam removal. Right now our permits are limiting us to August to November, which is northern spotted owl. And if we can get those tall trees that are growing out of the dam topped before then, we can actually get in there sooner, which will help the project along quite a bit. But overall, the regulatory agencies are on board with the project and the moving forward with the design phased approach. Not the design phase, but we're using what we have to date, but refining it. We really have a good design team with EKI and WRA out of Santa Rosa. So hopefully we'll have a more constructive update next in 2 weeks while we have holidays coming up. They are working around the clock to get this plan so we can get it submitted the first of the year. And the agencies seem on board, but to ensure that, we're also having a meeting next week following Thanksgiving holiday with our local electeds in state and Congressman Thompson's office to discuss this further to make sure the regulatory agencies stay on board with this project.
Very good. Any questions from the council? Nope. Okay, we'll move on to 7.2, update on wastewater treatment plant upgrade.
We're continuing to work on the financial plan for this project. It's required as a submittal to the wastewater board or the water board. We're pretty close. Finance Director Mitz has been working with our consultant and the bond consultant, Ken Deeker, to make sure, and we think we have a good plan approach, but she's going to finalize it when she gets back from vacation. And hopefully we can move forward with this project and get it started with the RFP process in the beginning of 2020. The bridging documents that the consultant's working on will be quickly, and then we'll bring them to the city attorney to review and concur before we go out to RFP process. And in addition to that, we did get our fine report from the 2019 rainstorms. We had a similar fine in 2018 from the 2017 storm system. The water board is catching up on their paperwork, and it's programmed in our operational budget to cover these expenses, and we'll be sending a letter to City Council just giving you a more detailed update on when these happened. Earlier this year, we had some issues with our chlorine system at the wastewater treatment plant. Instances between the Pond 5 and our pipeline between weren't getting the right contact on it. So we had to notate those in the file and the test results to the water board. But so they're minimum mandatory fines. So with that, that's why we need to get the plant upgraded as soon as we can.
Okay. Any questions from council? Okay, we'll move on to consent items. And members of the council or public may ask that any items be considered individually for purposes of considering alternative action, for extended discussion, or for public comment. Unless that is done, one motion may be used to adopt all recommended actions. So I will read through the items if anybody has an interest in pulling one. 8.1, 8.2.
Pull that.
Okay.
I think there's a typo in it, it seems to be.
Okay. 8.3, 8.4.
Sorry, could we pull 8.3?
Oh. Yep. Okay. So 8.2 and 8.3. 8.4. 8.4. Okay. And then 8.5.
Yep.
Okay. So with that, I will look for a motion on 8.1.
I move we approve consent item 8.1.
I second.
Councilmember Coberstein?
Yes.
Shuto?
Yes.
Knutson?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Doring?
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth?
Yes. Okay. Then we'll move to 8.2, and this is Mr. Peashley.
Maybe I could just, the reason what confuses me here is exactly what times the city is responsible for use and maintenance. It doesn't seem clear to me whether it says in one part, the whereas, it says during the time from August 1st through July 31st, which is basically the whole year. That's when the
That
city
should read January 31st.
Okay.
Yes.
That was my only comment, which I think that's a wrong date.
That was in there on purpose to test you. So we got you. Good job.
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Thank you.
Can I ask a clarifying question as well on the for the soccer use in the fall? Is that treated similarly to the little league in the spring and summer, or spring and early summer? Or?
Soccer use is city programs.
So we collect fees for participants.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And just to clarify for the public, this is about commercial use on the city property. This is not for everyday use by the community.
Correct.
Yes. Okay.
I'm sorry, who made the second?
I will.
And roll call.
Vice Mayor Doring?
Yes.
Councilmember Shuto?
Yes.
Knutson?
Yes.
Coberstein?
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth?
Yes. Okay, we'll move on to 8.3, and this is from our finance. Is there a question, Mr. Knudsen, on this one?
Yeah, maybe I didn't read the staff report completely, so I am curious for it appears well-used vehicles that these are to replace. Are those also on lease? Do they get sold back? What's the outcome of those vehicles in poor shape?
Okay, good evening, Councilmember. The two vehicles in question, one of those, which is vehicle 208, so that's the one that's going to replace by the F450, it's lived its life. That was not a lease vehicle. That was something the city purchased. It was a vehicle used for the sewer department. The F550 is going to be replacing the existing water utilities, well, not utilities department now. It's going to be replacing that. We're going to repurpose that truck and outfit it differently. We still haven't figured out what we need, as this is a new department. But this vehicle is going to take over that. So this one's going to be outfitted with equipment strictly for utility repair, underground repair. So the cranes, instances where we would need more equipment to do the equivalent of what this vehicle is going to be able to do. So instead of bringing out the backhoe to move a plate, this will be outfitted to do that. That's just an example.
Thanks. And then the other, we've, in the past, I know we've purchased specifically from the local Ford dealer, but this is not. We're intending to lease these. Is that correct?
It's a lease to own, I believe, because these are very unique vehicles that we would. The way we're going to outfit these, the resale value is probably not going to be all there for what we're going to invest in them. So we keep these.
And so there's really no chance to buy local. There's no chance to buy from
We
Zumwalt on
would
these.
buy through Enterprise, correct?
It would be lease to purchase through Enterprise.
Am I wrong that we haven't? I mean, haven't we in the past tried to buy from our local Ford dealer?
We have in the past, yes. I'm
So-
honestly not sure why that
It,
option wasn't explored.
It's basically because of our new program, right, going through Enterprise. So they source whatever's going to be more affordable as far as the chassis, right, the truck itself.
I just wonder if we could offer the opportunity for Zumwalt to, I mean, I don't know what the nature of our contract is, but I mean, I love to buy local. I just wonder if we could give them the opportunity to bid on this or not. And I'm sorry to raise these questions at the last minute.
That would be up to financing or the staff direction.
It's my understanding that we have a contract with Enterprise, and so that we've been working through.
Correct. So they're sourcing the best price for us to buy the cab itself, and then the outfitting of it actually gets outsourced to a different company, Sleazy, I believe they're called. And that's the name of the company. And so they came out, they give you a bid, they tell you, you tell them what you want your truck to do, and they tell you, okay, this is the best fit for this is the type of truck you need for for the requirements you're asking of us from the truck.
It also, the whole enterprise package that we brought to council 2 years ago, it includes asset management, and they also help us with like streamlining the gas purchasing, the card system, monitoring our use of the vehicles, making sure that, hey, they used $1,000 of gas this month instead of $500. They're monitoring the entire program of our fleet instead of hiring an individual specific to that in our city operations. In addition, we go to Zumwalt for our oil changes and for our repair and maintenance still. It's not just that the maintenance still, we can go anywhere we want. It's just they help monitor all of that. But
Enterprise has a comprehensive package that we're part of.
Yes.
Are there any other?
The only other comment I would make is we have to competitively bid purchase of vehicles like this, and so with the relationship with Enterprise, this is based on competitively bid prices that they use through a consortium. And if we were to want to offer the opportunity for the local Ford dealer to bid on that, we would need to prepare an RFP and go out to market on that.
And then I'll make one other brief comment too. It's been brought up in terms of why we are not using hybrid or electric vehicles for these vehicles, but these are more heavy-duty vehicles that we don't have the facilities to manage an electric or hybrid. The fact that these are new vehicles will give us, there'll be cleaner vehicles under today's standards than our existing vehicles. So we are moving a step forward.
Correct, with emissions, correct. And then as far as electric vehicles, because of the size of these, and again, what we're outfitting them with, they don't make them.
Okay. Very good. Do we have public comment? Yes. I will open the public comment.
Hi, Anthony McKelly. I just have a comment listening to everything. Are you spending $141,000 for a truck, and then you're going to outfit it later at some other cost? Or is the $141,000 with all the equipment you're going to throw on it? Or is this truck going to end up $250,000 when we're done? I'm just curious what you're buying for those numbers, because I mean, I own a 250 truck, and they're about $70,000 right now. But I'm just puzzled when Carlos said that we're going to outfit it later. I'm just curious of what you're getting for $141,000 is, I guess, what I'm saying. And does this double with this crane and all the other things you're going to put on it? And does that come back to the public, or is that just something you go and do? Thank you.
I can answer, Mr. McKelly. No, this price includes the outfitting on both vehicles.
Okay. Is there additional comment? I'll bring it back to the council, and If there's no additional comment, I will entertain a motion.
I'll move approval of item 8.3.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Koberstein?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring?
Yes.
Councilmember Chateau?
Yes.
Knudsen?
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth?
Yes. Okay, we'll move to 8.4. This is consideration and proposed approval of amendment number 1 in the amount of $12,200 to professional services agreement with Napa County Resource Conservation District, STH contract 2019-036 for mitigation monitoring on the Upper York Creek Dam removal project for a new not-to-exceed amount of $30,000. This is Ms. Smithies, and I don't know if there was a particular question.
Tom Belt, 1520 Hillview. Eric, I'm just curious why because of the change in the procedure in which the dam is going to be taken down and all of the implements that are going to be putting in the way to try and stop the siltation. It's gone up, 40% in price in 2 years, as far as the estimate, the contract with the monitoring. Wasn't 18,000 before? Or?
So the not to exceed was 17,800 a year ago. The project has stopped for over a year and a half. Basically, their portion of it. They did submit their draft earlier this year, and then this phase 1 was revised, and the MMP with the mitigation monitoring program was not completed, so they still had a draft. But now we have a new team on board, and there's additional revisions need to be made, and we're going to bring them on into additional review. There's a GMAP, a geophysical mitigation and monitoring. There's more than just one monitoring plan, so they're going to be utilized in helping assess with that, and working with our new consultant team on the Upper York Creek. So it's a little bit more than it was a year ago.
Okay. And if I could, I didn't know it was the proper time during her report on the York Creek Dam earlier, but I wanted to ask her if, following up on what Councilman Knudsen asked you last time, did you proceed in asking if the public can attend these meetings where we're going to be talking about these? I mean, they're open. I would think they would be open to the public.
Since it's a city project, well, I'm looking at our city manager wanted to respond to that. Typically, it's an applicant process, and you don't usually bring in other members of an agency into a project. So it might be a public project, but it's still considered a private project to the city. It might not be appropriate for members of the public to join those meetings, so it's an open conversation with the regulatory agencies, since it's a permitted project to the city, not necessarily to each resident in the city, if that makes sense.
And
Yes.
we're using this opportunity on every meeting to provide a transparent and open update for the public.
Yes.
Okay. But it's been going on for 24 years. And I would not be interested in asking questions. I wouldn't be asking. I just want to listen and see what's happening for myself. And you guys need to understand, I have almost a 30-year career with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I'm vested in getting this job done. And it's been very frustrating for me. And what I saw in the last report, or the one before that, was that the obstacle isn't the city, it's the other agencies. And I'd like to know that for myself, because I know people who still work for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And
Mr. Bell, we're going to be having a meeting next week with Mike Thompson's representative. We're going to be talking about how we proceed forward. So why don't we have that meeting and understand how we're going to be moving forward, and then we can check back in terms of process.
all right, well, the question was asked last. I'd like to just follow up on that. I'm still interested, so thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so if there's no additional comment on this, if there's a motion on 8.4.
I move that we approve 8.5.
8.4.
Oh, sorry, 8.4.
Second.
A roll call, please.
Councilor Chateau?
Yes.
Koberstein?
Yes.
Knudsen?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring?
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth?
Yes. Okay, we're at 8.5, consideration of a proposed approval of a resolution authorizing amendment number 1 to the professional services agreement with Dudek for an additional $78,650 for a total not to exceed contract amount of $313,161 in order to complete the Hunter Subdivision Environmental Impact Report. And Mr. Milken.
Thank you, Mayor. John Milliken, 1256 Hudson. Just to let you know, I am not against this addition to the EIR, and the. However, I do have some concerns and maybe some things that should be considered before we actually go ahead with this next step. And those mostly have to do with the arc of this EIR. It's going into its 9th year. The first one was a failure, ended at about 7 years. And the thing that brought it into failure mode was there was additional studies that needed to be done. Those had to be negotiated to and agreed to with the applicant. Applicant did not pay. The consultant finally got tired of it, just dropped the whole thing. And that went on for 7 years. So what I'm afraid of here as we get into our 2nd year, 2 years ago, Dudek was up here promoting their consulting services for this EIR. So here we are 2 years later, and we're still adding stuff, pretty significant stuff to the EIR. And it's going to go out, and then, do we collect money now? I would just like to see some qualifications on this, and that it actually gets done, it gets done quickly, and the money's put up front, and it's paid for right away. Because we're just coming off a third letter of identified issues in this 2-year thing that was done in May. And as far as I know, the applicant has not responded to those identified issues. One of the biggest things was apparently they owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to the EIR. It was never collected up in front, and there's not an administrative fee. By the way, the St. Helena administrative fee, I think it's 10%. Santa Rosa charges 15%. And if you look at how much time it's taken staff on this, you may want to look into increasing that amount, by the way. So I really begin to question after time if the applicant is even really interested in ever finishing this EIR. They could be running out the clock, hoping possibly for a reduction in the affordable housing things, so that maybe they wouldn't have to do an EIR, or there could be some concessions made there. They seem to be willing to just go on and on and on, and this is aided and abetted by the lead agency, City of St. Helena, who keeps writing out these identified issues letters. And the third one, first one, April of 18, responded to 4 months later, August. Second one, September 18, responded to 5 months later. Third one, May 17. We're at the 6 months right now, and I checked the website today. There's been no response as far as I know. And so one of the biggest things in these things is a real common theme through all three is 17146, the Municipal Code, which has a lot of restrictions on affordable housing. And we keep asking for more information. All these letters, 3 letters, keep saying we need more information so we can conduct the EIR. And to know these affordable housing, what it gets down to is how many units will potentially be built, what's going to be their shape, what's going to be their size, how many people are going to live there, how many bedrooms, how many cars, how much water. And you really cannot do an EIR until you know these numbers. And so we don't know these numbers right now because the applicant has never provided a affordable housing agreement that actually specifies, one, how they're going to comply with the municipal code, which was drafted, those 17146 was drafted in 2003. And then secondly, how many potential units there could be. And this has all kinds of ramifications on evaluating environmental impacts. And you really can't do it. So the city just lets these guys go on and on and on and on. And then what happens is you start getting age information. Let's say a traffic study was done in the spring of 2018. When they finally get around to doing the DEIR, we're looking at, well, these numbers are from spring of 2018. We have to redo the traffic. And that's actually the one that finally, the straw that broke the camel's back in the first 7-year effort, is that some of the early stuff that got done was just, it was stale. It wasn't applicable anymore. In the meantime, in the 2 years, got the Castellucci project going in down there. I don't know what's going on Adams Street, at the end of Adams Street, but it just keeps going on and on and on. And really, we just got to say, okay, this is it. We're going to do the EIR, and we're going to stop letting this just go on forever because it's a bit ridiculous right now. And like I said, the biggest issue is they have 51 market rate single-family homes, and then there's lot 52, where they put all the affordable housing. And that is just so in conflict with the municipal code, and nobody's ever said, no, you got to spread it out equitably, they got to be like-kind. You basically have two projects here. You have the affordable project, and you have the market family homes. And they're trying to apply the affordable components to the market family home section, but there's no affordable projects in the 51 lots. And that is in direct conflict with the municipal code. If you go in and read, you should go in and read the 3 letters that have been written over the 2 years, and you should go in and look at 17-146, the municipal code, and say whatever they come back with, no way meets those considerations. The only way they could maybe get around it is they come to the council and ask for relief so that they can get some relief from the council for something that will further their already existing obligations for affordable housing. The last one I saw, they called it clustering. We're just going to cluster all the affordable housing things because that way we can have more affordable housing. But that's not the way the municipal code was written. So anyway, that's my request, is that as you keep approving things, you got to start putting limits on these people, and they've got to, pay on time, and this just can't keep going on and on and on. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any initial council comments?
Can I ask a point of question? And I'm sorry I couldn't ask this offline, but John brought up an interesting point here. Was the prior EIR, or are the elements that are already written, are those available, or is it sort of held in abeyance until it's finished and then published? So do we have access to the elements that are already done, or even the prior EIR that was abandoned? I mean, sorry, CEQA document that was or EIR document that was abandoned? Or if we don't know, that's
I don't have a
too.
good answer for you without speaking with the planning director, who's not available tonight. All of the submittals are on the city's website. There may be one letter that is pending posting on that website that summarizes the fees that were due and have subsequently been paid.
So, yeah, please.
Mr. Milliken, I think you raised good comments, many points that we've all been wondering about too. And we do have a new city attorney, and we need to give her a little time to get up to speed on the CEQA issues for this project and also the inclusionary ordinance. But I hope we'll be able to have answers to some of the very questions you're asking. And I also agree, is it not possible for us to ask for the upfront deposit for this work as opposed to trying to get it paid later? And frankly, I'm a little surprised now that they're looking at the presence of Native American remains. Given what happened with the whole levee project, how could this come as a surprise to somebody and not something that they should have thought about a long time ago? But nonetheless, that's what it is. I mean, I'd be favoring going ahead, provided we get the deposit first.
I agree with that. I think that's a good idea.
And for clarification for the public, these monies, these numbers, 78,650, 313, 161, that comes from the applicant. That's not the city paying. The other question I have is there a timeline on a EIR? I mean, is there a way to give a bookend?
There's not really a way to give a bookend at this point in time. They continue to, they have paid their fees, and they are aware that there is a next step to the analysis that's needed at this point in time. They have an opportunity under 17-146 for alternative approvals, which I know the council has an interest in having our new city attorney take a look at. But this is a necessary next step for them in order to advance this project. And as you mentioned, all of the fees will be paid by the applicant, and we will seek the deposit up front.
Okay. So with that, is there a motion?
Well, I would move approval of 8.5 with the condition that the developer put up a deposit for the estimated cost of the additional work. Maybe you give them a time frame and then we proceed.
I second.
Councilmember Coberstein?
Yes.
Chateau?
Yes.
Knudsen?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring?
No.
Mayor Ellsworth?
Yes. Okay, we'll move on now to 9.1, public hearings. Proposed adoption and second reading of an ordinance amending Title 15, Buildings and Construction of the St. Helena Municipal Code. Adopt and amend in full the 2019 California Building Standards Code, Title 24. And this is prepared by Mr. Henry, the Chief Building Official, who I'm not seeing in.
So this is simply the second reading of the report you received at your prior meeting.
So we've already discussed, so we would just be seeking a motion. Should I open for public comment?
This is a public hearing.
Yes, sorry. So is there a public comment on this?
I don't know if this would be the proper time to ask this question, but do the new ordinances, do the new building codes, the thing, does it relate to our lot line adjustments and setbacks and so forth and so on, as far as the size of the buildings, the FAR ratios and things like that? For example, I mean, it's been talked about at planning commissions in the past that we make an exemption for single-car garages on lots where it doesn't count towards the FAR ratio. And I know that was something that was going to be considered in the future. And doing away with that. So will this have anything to do with the city going forward and approving?
My understanding is that is another, we're going to be moving forward with the zoning and municipal code update, which will look at those things. This is more specific to building codes.
As prescribed by the state. Is that? Okay, I'm sorry.
So there'll be opportunity on the other.
Thank you.
Coming. So, seeing any other public comment, seeing none, I'll close the public comment, bring it back to the council. Any thoughts? Any motion?
I received a comment today from Pam Smithers, head of the ATSC, kind of wondering how this fits in with the directives that they're working on, and I think most of their directives go beyond what's in the basic code. So at some point, I believe we were going to get a report back, maybe from planning department, about how those directives might be worked into our code. That's my understanding what we're doing with them.
The directives that the ATSC committee is working on relate to a climate action plan, which often will take code issues and enhance the goal for projects specifically. So think, for example, the minimum code requirement may be a certain level of insulation, but our expectation is that the applicant uses a higher number. And so those will become the building blocks for an eventual climate action plan and have some synergy with the climate action goals that are identified in the newly adopted general plan.
Yeah, the request was whether we could deal with them tonight, and I think the answer really is no. That's a second step that comes at a future date.
Is there a motion?
It's not a motion, but I'm willing to move forward with this. One of the things that occurs to me, and I didn't get an answer to this, maybe I can get it in the next round of discussion here, or we can agendize it for a future agenda, is the notion of using fire-resistant materials. I could not find anywhere in the staff report or in any of the proposed code changes whether that is going to be an enhancement for our community, improved in terms of using fire-resistant materials, especially given the conditions we have here, even though we may not necessarily be in the various tiers where that would apply. It would be something that something to explore, whether we can go beyond what the state is requiring And it's just something that's becoming more important to me, and I just don't see that addressed here. And maybe that's something that I can get answered later on with the building inspector and the planning director. Be an area of focus in particular for me.
Right. I'd like the opportunity to confer with the chief building official to answer that question. I don't know whether there are limitations on building products. I imagine there are expectations that may consist of some enhancements in this particular code update, but they probably still provide for an array of building materials. Some cities have taken a step to enhance the type of materials that are used for building and limit an applicant's choice. And so that will be the subject of the conversation that I have with him, and we can bring you back a report and information on that.
Any other thoughts? So if there's a motion?
I'll move approval of the staff recommendation.
I'll second.
Do I have to read the
Vice-
title?
Vice Mayor Doring?
Yes.
Councilmember Cho?
Yes.
Knudsen?
Yes.
Koperstein?
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth?
Yes. So we'll move on now. We're going to do a little movement of the new business item. We're going to push it forward. This is the Marin Clean Energy item. So we're going to hear that now. That's 11.1, and then we'll finish up with the old business. So this is item 11.1, consideration to adopt a resolution authorizing the city to enroll in the 100% renewable energy option with Marin Clean Energy and authorizing use of reserves and fund balances for 1, general fund utilities of $5,570, 2, water fund utilities of $5,125, and 3, wastewater fund utilities of $2,645 to cover the additional energy costs for the remainder of fiscal year 2019 and 20. And this is prepared by Ms. Smithies.
And I'll jump in and take a quick summary of this. I first want to acknowledge the work of the Active Transportation and Sustainability Committee. It's really their focus on sustainability issues that has helped bring this particular issue forward. When the city buys electrical energy through Marin Clean Energy, our energy portfolio consists of 60% renewable resources. That's essentially the baseline under MCE, Marin Clean Energy. The city of Napa, the county of Napa, have entered into a 100% renewable portfolio. And this committee of ours has recommended the city transition to what MCE is calling their Deep Green program, consisting of 100% renewables. So think solar, think hydro, sources like that. We took a look at the cost. The cost to the city is $20,000 annually. That represents approximately a 4% increase over what we invest today. With the change, this is something that we are recommending the city move forward on. It's compatible with our new general plan. There are regional conversations today occurring with our partners around the county and the other municipalities in Napa County. And we anticipate that 4 of the other 6 agencies will also be transitioning to a deep green program within the next 2 months. This is really also an opportunity for the community to become aware. If the city took this step, it's also an opportunity to raise awareness within the community that our residents also have the same choice available to them. They can also opt into a deep green program that for a modest cost will transition the portfolio of energy sources from 60% renewable to a 100% renewable. So we have a resolution available for you tonight, and happy to answer any questions you have on this.
Are there any council questions, comments?
No, just I'm so grateful for this to be on here. There's another study out today from the UN on climate change saying that none of us are doing enough, countries, cities, individuals, and so this is an opportunity to do more. So thank you.
Any comment? I'm going to open it up to public comment.
Gopal Shankar, living in Napa now. Mark said it beautifully, so just urge you to vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll reiterate what Mr. Press, oh, sorry, we have a.
Henry Gunling, and my wife and I are residents of St. Helena, and lived my whole life in the Napa Valley. And I agree with Gopal. Mark said it beautifully. But I would like to just mention just a couple of things. One is to congratulate St. Helena for the past steps that you've taken. I remember previous council early on, St. Helena was was I think the first city in the county to have a sustainability committee, and meanwhile that's changed into other things. But that was cutting edge. The city of St. Helena was the first city in the county to pass a resolution that made that waived the fee for installing an EV charger, which was probably 10 years ago now. But I'm on the board of the Gasser Foundation, and we started an initiative back in 2007 called Sustainable Napa County, which then became a nonprofit. Gopal was on that board, and I thought I was going to be here mostly to support Gopal, but again, Mark said it beautifully. I can't think of anything that the city could do that would be more impactful and more important than approving this. And it seems like you're already moving in that direction, but I just wanted to thank you very much. It's a big deal, and hardly anybody knows about it or even thinks about it. Most people don't even know what MCE is. So to the extent that larger organizations like the cities and the county and bigger businesses switch over to MCE, we get closer. Every time that happens, we get closer to the point where Napa County and its residents and its businesses are using 100% renewable energy. And it's so simple. All you have to do is contact them and say, gee, I want to be deep green. And I did that a long time ago. I know a lot of other folks have. And but it's a real opportunity to educate and help us to get there. And I can't think of anything that any of us as residents of Napa County could do that would be more, get us closer to actually doing something to help with climate change. So I really urge you to support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there additional public comment? Seeing none, I'll close the public comment, bring it back to the council. Any thoughts?
I agree with everything that the gentlemen have said and what Mark has said. One of the distressing things that I heard, though, was that not everyone even knows enough about marine clean energy. That, to me, is distressing to hear that, and I think it is true. I've asked at least 3 or 4 times over the last 4 or 5 years that we receive a report from the representative from Napa County who serves on that board. He happens to be a county supervisor. We should be getting regular updates on the progress that MCE is making, what the controversies are, what the issues are, how we can engage with that. We're member cities, and yet we don't receive any information on how well they're doing and what the current issues are. So we really need to get more information from our representative, or if that is not the case, from some other source. Then I have a question for staff, and I should have asked this offline, but I'm curious, when we're talking about the $20,000 or so extra in funds that have to be expended, do we have a determination as to the savings that we are achieving by implementing the LED lights for our city lights? It was represented that we'd have a substantial savings in our electricity bill for the city by going with LED, and I have not received any indication one way or another how much we're saving, if any. I don't know. If we don't have the answer tonight, I'd be curious to look at that down the road.
And we could provide that. We received a letter from MCE, our representative, a couple of months ago, so I could share that with council.
And the information that we received recently does a nice job of showing the trend over time, but what it doesn't do is convert the data to dollars. And so what we need to do is, I think, take a second step at converting the data and showing you what the actual dollar impact is to the city. But there is a trend line for all of our electrical accounts, and there are descriptions on that, and I think it's about 2 to 5 pages long, if I remember correctly. It's quite a series of electrical accounts.
I just got an update from my husband in our home going to LEDs and all of the other energy efficiency, and we're saving $100 a month. So it is significant to make these changes. And I think with this, isn't it true that the state has set it so that you have to opt out if you don't want to be deep green? So we all opt. No, that's not true. Okay.
So, when the sorry, Gopal again. When the law was passed in 2002, it was written so that anytime a CCA, community choice aggregation, which MCE was the first formed, anyone within that jurisdiction was automatically in. And if they wanted to remain with the incumbent utility, PG&E in this case, they would have to opt out. But when they were in, they were at the default level, which is a light green, or it was 50% a couple of years ago. That's climbed to 60% now. But if you want to opt up, you have to make that choice.
Okay.
Yeah. Can I address your issue, Paul? Yes. I think I may be the guy, other than Brad Wagonknecht, talking to MCE most regularly. And I've told them people don't know what MCE does. They send out mailers as they're required to by law about what their portfolio standard, etc. is. Unfortunately, looks like junk mail, so it just gets tossed. They're looking to hire a part-time ambassador for Napa County to get the word out, man booths and so forth. And I've asked them about the information that's specific to the city of St. Helena. I presume no one in St. Helena really cares about Calistoga and Napa and so forth. You want to know how you're doing. But they can't publish that information for St. Helena specifically without violating privacy issues, which they're very concerned about. So it's just sort of a Napa County aggregate that they prepare for us.
So as an individual homeowner, you need to opt up.
Yes.
To be a part of this.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. So,
Mr. Mayor?
oh, yes.
Can we, since we're talking green, and I know ATSC is working on some things, can we agendize an open discussion about the city's green initiatives and ways we could, in the future? I mean, this is one thing. There's other things, and I think we should, as a progressive and, wealthy Bay Area town, North Bay town, we should probably put some more focus on it.
Yeah, I think that sounds like
of
a good
interest.
I think it is, particularly as we're talking about our climate issues. I think it's very relevant.
Can I recommend that I know that there'll be updates coming partly due to the city's involvement at a regional level with the climate initiatives. And we have a general plan that outlines 51 specific tasks. So we are very organized in that respect. We have 51 specific tasks that we need to begin to address with a new general plan that is essentially a roadmap for a number of these initiatives. And I think it's fair to say that we will have staff working with our ATSC committee to work on prioritizing some of these initiatives and then developing a achievable work plan that balances staffing limitations with our ambitions and tries to prioritize this work. So I do see this emerging over the next 2 to 3 months, and I'm anticipating that we're also going to be joined with a new planning and building director in January. And so with the complement of all of that, I think I would anticipate having us initiate some of that prioritization early in 2020. And when we get a little more organized, we will plan to bring you an update on that work.
I think that sounds
Great.
excellent.
I'll move approval of the staff recommendation. I'm sorry.
I just had two brief comments. First of all, I wanted to reiterate what Mr. Presswich said, that us doing this as a city hopefully can help our community individually understand the possibilities here. And then, as difficult as the PSPS power shutoffs were, it's given us an opportunity to really look at our energy and how we get it and where we get it from, the dialogue with PG&E, understanding MCE, Marine Clean Energy. So I think over the coming months, too, this dialogue is going to keep our energy and power in the forefront. So this is an opportune time for us, to keep it on the radar and keep the conversation going. So with that, we have a motion and for a
You
second.
want me to do it?
Go ahead.
Okay. I move that we. You just need. You already did. Oh, I thought he
For a
cut you
second.
off, so you didn't want to finish it. Second. I'll second it. I didn't hear the whole thing. Sorry.
Vice Mayor Doring?
Yes.
Councilmember Chateau?
Yes.
Knudsen?
Yes.
Goberstein?
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth?
Yes.
And Mayor, just to close out this, I didn't want to be presumptuous, but I anticipate that we'll put together a shine article for the community that notes the council's transition from 60% to 100% renewable, and will explain how residents of the city can also opt into this program. We'll do that early in 2020.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move now to our old business items. This is item 10.1, updated attachment, annual elm tree tunnel update and presentation of tree risk assessment and review of existing elm tree management plan by consultant HortScience, a division of Bartlett Consulting. And this is Carlos.
Good evening once again, Council. My name is Carlos Uribe, City Arborist. First, I'd like to start by thanking Councilmember Chateau and Mayor's little speech for the Arbor Day. I think it was, we ended up doing 5 trees. We spread about, I think it was between 7 to 8 yards of mulch. So, huge success, and I'd like to commend you guys for that. And speaking of trees, we're going to stick with the presentation by our consulting arborist, John Leffenweld, on the tree risk assessment for the Behringer Elm Tunnel. So, let him go ahead.
Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Carlos, for the introduction. I know you guys have some important stuff on the agenda, so I will try to make this as quick as possible. We were hired by the city to assess risk and health and structure of the Behringer elms. A little bit of background. Don't bother to read this. I'll give you the background. As you're probably aware, these trees were planted in 1885 by the Behringer brothers. Approximately 150 trees, 75 on each side of the road, about 145 of which remain. Some of those are mature trees, some of those are new trees. The trees create a canopy over Highway 29, hence the Elm Tunnel moniker. And they are part of the National Historic Landmark designation of the Behringer Winery District. So management of the trees is constrained a bit. In addition, they're growing on Caltrans property. They're managed by the city, vested interests of community members and Behringer wineries. So that requires a pretty flexible management plan. And part of what we were hired to do is to look at the existing management plan and provide some recommendations. So we being me and my colleague Jane, assessed the trees over a period of time between February and June of this year. Looking at the trees from the ground, what we call a level 2 assessment. Look at the whole tree, look at the health and structure, look for flagging, which is an indicator. Flagging is dieback of branches, indicator of Dutch elm disease. The trees do have Dutch elm disease, and they've been managed for that over the years. And I would say successfully managed, because they continue to thrive where most American elms have died as a result of Dutch elm disease. So sounded the trunks of the trees with a rubber mallet, looking for defects, hollows, decay, and then rated the risk associated with the trees based on these current best management practice. And then we prepared a couple of maps, which you'll get to see. Again, too much verbiage up here to explain, but the bottom line is risk assessment is a combination of the likelihood of a part of the tree failing, a branch, a stem, or the whole tree. So the likelihood of a part failing, and then the consequences of that failure. And using these two matrices, this is the basis for this current best management practice risk assessment. So I looked at each tree. These are the mature trees in particular. I didn't rate risk for the young trees. And and rated their risk based on my experience and then occupancy rates of the various targets that I worked with Carlos to identify. So it's a comprehensive approach. It is systematic. It does, of course, capture condition and risk at one point in time, and trees do change over time, so it is something that we recommend you periodically update. So a total of 144 trees were assessed. 88 of those were mature, 56 were young. A few of those trees were removed or lost in the interim, meaning one of the young trees got hit by a car, 4 of the trees were dead, and the city had removed those between the time we looked at them the first time and subsequent times. So the mature trees are fairly large, 20 to 36 inches. Of course, you know, for a tree that is 140 years old, it's not as large as you might expect. Part of that is because they were planted very close together, 18 feet on center, so the majority of the canopy extends east and west over Highway 29. In addition, the trees on the west side have been topped by the utilities for the overhead utility lines, and that too promotes this growth of lateral branches over the targets. So while some of these things are good for the tunnel effect, they do also increase risk for our primary target, which was Highway 29. So they're within a few feet of the edge of the road. That causes its own set of problems. As you can see here, several of the trees have been struck by cars. Those wounds can be colonized by decay, and those were the kinds of defects that we were looking for. How many trees had significant wounds, how many trees had decay, and that can increase the risk for failure depending on where that decay is. And then several of the trees, 61 of the trees, had minor flagging, indicating minor Dutch elm disease. 18 had moderate, and 5 had significant. So those trees with significant flagging are among the trees that we would recommend for removal. And I will move through the results here. The young trees overall were in good to excellent condition. There were a few issues with multiple stems, branch spacing, etc. And we provided some recommendations to the city for pruning early in the year, which was already carried out. But for the most part, the young trees are really in good condition. The city is doing a fairly good job, in my opinion, of maintaining the new trees. So again, one of the maps we created, a GIS-based map showing tree locations. Those numbers correspond to tags that we put on the tree so that when we're talking about tree 88, you know where tree 88 is and you have the data on that tree and you can locate it. So again, I mentioned already, rating risk is a systematic process, but it does only capture their condition at one point in time. The primary and secondary failure modes really refer to, for each tree, I looked at a branch failure or a stem failure. So one would be a primary, one would be a secondary. And this is really part of that systematic process to identify what we think is the most likely failure, primary defect, and then secondary potential failures, because these trees certainly had a history between the topping for the utility lines and the number of years they've been in the ground. There were significant defects. So risk associated with primary defects was low for 22 trees, moderate for 53 trees, and high for 9 trees. And feel free, if you have questions, to ask now or afterwards. Stems and scaffold branches were the most common failure modes for both primary and secondary failures. We looked at residual risk. What happens when I recommend you prune the tree and you prune it? How much risk is left? So for the most part, we were able, if those management recommendations are carried out, the residual risk would be low for the majority of those trees. There were a couple of trees that had imminent failure potential. I called the city on when I was out there doing the field work, and they got a hold of Caltrans, who does the pruning, and those 2 trees were addressed right away. So risk ratings really are meant to help prioritize management. Risk rating doesn't define a threshold for action. A tree doesn't become risky at a certain rating. It is up to the managers to decide how much risk they're willing to tolerate and what the goals and constraints to their management program are. So my primary recommendations focus really on pruning 39 trees, removing 7 trees, removing stems in 4 trees, and then there was a group of trees that I said, these are trees you should consider for removal. The risk may not be high, condition is low, and the structure has been compromised. So while they may not be your highest priority trees, these would be 20 trees that you want to look at over the next 5-10 years and identify those for removal as you move through the stand. And really that's what we're talking about. This stand will eventually be replaced with new trees. Ideally, over a long period of time, those young trees can grow, new trees are added, you have some structural and age diversity across the stand. Currently, all the trees were planted at once, they're all the same age, they're all having the same structural defects or similar structural defects at the same time. So introducing some age diversity over the course of their management is a good thing. Again, we produced a map, several maps, but this one shows management recommendations color-coded by tag number. Okay, I'm going to skip over secondary recommendations. They were pretty similar to the primary recommendations. And then there are advanced assessments that were recommended. So I was doing this from the ground. I could only really sound the lower trunk. Obviously, there are some defects, like in this photo, that were out of my reach. I couldn't probe that cavity. I couldn't sound around it. But I can tell that there's decay there and that the stems attached to that decay are at an elevated risk for failure. So one of my recommendations would be have an aerial inspection performed. You get somebody up into the tree to actually look at the attachment of those branches. So that would be an example of an aerial inspection. I mean, an example of an advanced assessment. And we recommended advanced assessments for 30 of the trees, 15 of which were among those 20 to consider for removal. So if you don't remove them, you should probably do these further testings. Another advanced assessment map, just color-coded by tree number. Management recommendations for young trees. In general, I think the city is doing a good job. Can improvements be made? Yes. You excavate a big hole 2 or 3 times the size when planting the tree. You amend it with a high organic matter compost. And you avoid planting those trees in wire baskets. Some of the young trees we noticed were planted in wire baskets. Irrigation, for the most part, I think the city is doing a good job. You're irrigating the trees, the young trees specifically, during the driest months of the year. We did provide some recommendations for tapering that watering so that you build up during the spring to a peak watering level and taper again in the fall as you expect rains to come and temperatures are dropping. And this should go on for the first 2 to 3 years, meaning as that tree becomes established, you will need to be irrigating it. Otherwise, you are at risk of losing that investment. I would also say that pruning of young trees in particular is critical. That is one of the most important things you can do to create good structure and provide the tree with the best possibility for establishment. And as I said before, we had provided some recommendations to the city to carry out early in the year, which were completed between the time we looked at the trees in February and the time we looked at the trees in May. So staking is also important, but most important is that you remove the stakes after a couple of years because the tree needs to not be supported at some point. Young tree management map, color-coded. Now, on to the Elm Tunnel Management Plan. The current management plan, Elm Tunnel Management Plan, the ETMP. The current management plan is really more of a historic document describing who's responsible for what levels of management, lines of communication, etc. It does not really dive into the arboricultural side, the treatments to manage trees over time. And so there are a lot of recommendations, but the general idea is a robust elm tunnel management plan should really provide the steps for managing the trees from cradle to grave, near-term goals, long-term goals, plant procurement, standards for managing the trees for risk, standards for managing the trees for pruning, tree assessments, wood disposal, all of the things that might fall under tree management. And currently the Elm Tree Management Plan really doesn't do that. So there are a lot of recommendations in the full report that the city has and can begin to build a more comprehensive management plan. So Dutch elm disease management, the city also asked us to comment on their current program for Dutch elm disease management, which currently involves a soil drench in the spring to manage the vector of the disease. This is a fungal disease vectored by beetles. And so a soil drench of merit for those mature trees that show Dutch elm disease, that helps to limit beetle activity and limit the vectoring of the disease, and then a systemic injection of shepherd in late summer to suppress Dutch elm disease. So generally this is a good program and is kind of the current standard. There are some alternatives being proposed, none of which have a proven track record, and some of which may not be practical for city staff to undertake. They can be pretty labor intensive, but certainly are worth considering. And we generally recommend an integrated pest management approach, one that would involve monitoring the disease, monitoring tree health, monitoring beetle activity, applying preventative fungicides to the healthy trees, and replacing dead and diseased trees, a lot of which is already being done by the city. So there are options to enhance the current program, but I really think that the city has been doing a very good job. So details are included more details included in the report. Final slide, long-range planning. A couple of the things that the city is dealing with, in particular, are plant procurement. Hard to find Dutch elm disease-resistant American elm varieties. We had suggested considering what we call contract growing. You set up a relationship with a grower. You say, we're going to need 5 American elms of different varieties every year for the next 10 years or however long, and then they grow those plants for you. So it does allow for a little more control over the process. You don't have to be searching for growers at the last minute. Do you have this, etc. So that's one area for potential improvement. And then the other thing is, looking at the grove as a whole, there are small groups of trees that are either in really poor condition or have elevated levels of risk. The city could consider removing 2, 3, 4, 5 of these trees in a group. That would create a gap in the canopy. That gap would allow for more resources for the new trees, more light, more soil, nutrients, etc. And so those small gaps might create better opportunities for the new trees to grow, better health, better structure. So that's pretty much the extent of my report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Really appreciated. So I'm going to open it up to the council for initial comments or questions. Any?
I'll take the bait. That was a spectacular report. It was superb.
Oh, thank you.
And it should be, it's the gold standard. You have done, I want to thank the city for hiring you guys, because that's what an incredibly, useful document you have created.
Appreciate that.
So
That is the goal.
The only question I had, and I'm sort of informed by, I read recently, well, I haven't quite finished it, but The Secret Life of Trees.
Yeah.
What a great book. So many of the, it looks like challenged trees are actually under the power lines. Yeah.
So
could you comment on that?
Yeah. So the topping of the trees to keep those power lines clear of vegetation and prevent fires. That affects the health and structure of the trees. It creates wounds. Those wounds can get colonized by decay, and that, I think the photo that I showed there, where there was some decay just out of reach, that's a tree that had been topped for the power lines. And so that repeated pruning does a couple of things. It removes the photosynthetic material and the tree's ability to produce resources for growth, but it also opens up wounds, and those wounds are not only colonized by decay, but that can also attract the beetles. So I think that overall the trees on the west side under the power line are both structurally and health-wise in worse condition.
I'm going to open it up to public comment to see if there's anybody that has any questions or comments. Seeing none, I will close the public comment, and then I had a few questions. In terms of replacing a tree with a young tree, and if, say, we were to establish a relationship with a grower, what's the largest young tree that we could bring in? I mean, can we start with a tree that's of mid-size rather than the small ones?
Good question. It depends on your goals, of course. I generally recommend starting small. That my experience is, over a 5-year period, that 15-gallon tree will catch up with the 24-inch box in terms of growth. Again, assuming all of the things are the same. Good soil, it's watered, yada, yada, yada. So I generally recommend, unless you need an immediate visual impact, you want to put those trees in and create a real screen, or it's a specimen tree, you want someone to see something when they come in, I recommend going small.
Okay.
Saves you money, and if they're well maintained, they will fill in and grow and catch up to that 24-inch box.
Okay.
Recognize that the grower who sells you the 24-inch box moved the 15-gallon into that 24-inch box probably not that long ago.
Okay. So then, in your opinion, with care, with a program, a comprehensive program, and the right approach, we can get this elm tunnel. Well, I guess what I worry about is when we talk about Dutch elm disease, that other places in the country have had failure of their trees. But do you believe that we can, if we're on top of it, keep this grove healthy?
The current grove, or?
Well, the current grove, and then with replacement.
Yes, okay. I do. Dutch elm disease resistant trees are just that. They're still susceptible to some degree. So you may lose trees over time, especially during periods of extreme drought. Other stresses that cause the trees' natural responses to these things to fail or to not be as resistant, you may lose trees. But for the most part, absolutely. I think overall the trees have been treated and have, for the most part, maintained. Yes, you're losing some. They're 140 years old, and they've been under pressure for 100 of those years by Dutch elm disease. So the fact that they're still around says something that you're doing something right, that the current program is working. And so you may well always have to do some management for Dutch elm disease, even with resistant varieties, but I suspect that over time that program will also, you'll be able to reduce the applications.
Okay, and then the age diversity, that to me makes a lot of sense, but that's part of the overall health, is having diverse ages of the trees.
Yes, that's the health of the stand.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. And so that, just like in any natural stand, you have young trees coming up and old trees falling over. And so this is, we're recreating that in some way. But absolutely, age diversity is an important part of keeping the stand healthy.
Okay.
It was probably obvious, but also fascinating to learn about the growth patterns of the trees based on the minimal spacing when they were originally planted. You had an east-west canopy, which created something great for the community, the tunnel effect. So that leads me to the question, with the new trees, the younger trees, is it your considered opinion that the spacing is now appropriate?
Good question. I'm not the historian, but I think you would have to check with what you can and can't do in terms of the National Historic Landmark designation. But generally, I would recommend 30 feet on center. They're at 18 feet currently. It's close. If you want to have a full canopied tree, 30 feet would be a minimum. These trees obviously can have a 60-foot spread. So even at 30 feet, you're going to have about half a canopy. But 60 feet might be too much. So in general, I would say, if possible, the new trees should get spread further apart, and or you remove two, you replace it with one. So again, that assumes a lot, because I know what little I know about the National Historic Landmark designation is they do not let you change much. And so spacing may have to remain the same.
The other fascinating thing, interesting thing, although this could be unsettling for our community, is the benefit of the gap, as you called it, for new trees, to give them the room. It's kind of reminds me of Deepak Chopra, the gap in the gap. That's going to be kind of hard for our community. I think we're visually, struck by these big gaps, and I think that's where I get the most attention from constituents. So I think it is something that we need to emphasize with our community, that it actually is more productive to give those younger trees a chance by having more room to work with.
Yes.
Comment on that.
Yeah, I understand completely. It is a visual impact for sure. And it doesn't mean that you can't remove one and replace it. I mean, it will have some space, and those young trees will grow. It is a what do I want to say? We're stepping back a little bit and looking at the stand as a whole, and it's sometimes hard to do, I think, for all of us, especially when we're emotionally attached to the trees. So it isn't by any means the only way to proceed, but I think that there is value, and if we can educate the public on the value of creating an opening, and that those new trees will grow faster and fill in faster as a result of that opening, then perhaps that is an approach that can be sold to the public.
I wanted to echo the comments from Councilmember Knudsen. An excellent report. I actually enjoyed reading it, and I typically don't enjoy reading reports. A lot of good information
thank you.
there. So I was curious, just from to kind of keep track historically of the trees that are marked. In the prior report, they had numbers to those trees, and your report has numbers to those trees, and there's going to be a report in 5 years with numbers. The numbers are all different, right? You can't really track, or can you? The number system used before your report is different than the number system you use, correct?
I haven't actually seen a previous report.
Okay.
I suspect it is. Generally speaking, if we're out there and there's an existing tag on the tree, we will record that number.
Okay.
Create a field old tag. So that just what you're talking about. When I'm talking about tree 88, that's really old tree number 22. But I didn't see any old tags, so I didn't collect any of that data. I think locationally we could probably figure it out. But that would take some time.
All right.
Thank you.
I do have one question. What is the timing for the trees when you put them in, and for them to grow, and for that visual impact not to be so abrupt?
Good question. Probably in the 5 to 7 year range before you have a tree that people would say, oh, it's a tree. Because otherwise, it's going to stay here, it's going to get here. By the time it gets to 6 feet by 6 feet, you probably have, your constituents would say, oh, there's really a tree. So, 5 to 7 years is realistic between it going in and someone being able to drive down the road and go, oh, they have replaced those trees.
And what if we gave it space?
That's a good question. Probably 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any additional questions?
I have a question, I think, more for Mark and the staff. The end of your report has a lot of recommendations about the Elm Tunnel Management Plan, which seems to be sort of the crux of how we deal with this resource into the future. And this requires us getting together with Caltrans, and it seems like much more of a management plan than what had been produced before. And I'm not expecting an answer right now, but maybe you have a plan for how we would actually accomplish that, to meet with them and incorporate some of these standards. When do we have the time for somebody to do that? Are they receptive to something that's more vigorous than what we've had? Question you don't have to answer right now, but maybe
I was already thinking where you're going right now, and I think the answer is that we keep this moving. You don't want to spend money on this beautiful study and then not do anything with it. So the next steps would be coordinating with Caltrans and bringing this to them and saying, actually adopting it. I think the one that's still located on the website says draft on it. So I want to make sure that we keep this momentum moving forward so it's written in stone or electronically so everyone knows and it's not a mystery on how we maintain this Elm Tunnel.
Well, have we shared this report with them? I mean, maybe that would be the first step or something. I'll leave it to you guys, but I think to me that's the most important takeaway from here is that we adopt this management plan with your recommended changes.
And as we're having a dialogue with Caltrans on some of the other issues in that area, we are talking to Caltrans. We have contact, and so this seems like a good opportunity, a good time where we're already in dialogue on a related area. But I feel like this. In the neighborhood, this is the time that I think we could get some traction.
Could we ask HortScience to build the management plan for us? I mean, they've made some recommendations, but why not extend their contract and have them write it? Is that possible? With, of course, with our staff input and participation.
I was going to also raise the issue of the advanced assessments that were recommended, and I think that there's obviously more work to do in that space for us to bring back to you options and funding strategies on how we advance that. And I think we're enthusiastic about the idea of continuing the relationship and working to build a broader plan. I think there's obviously there's coordination with Caltrans that's needed, but I think we also talked a little bit tonight about the telephone, the power lines above it, and it does raise a question of potential undergrounding with PG&E. And there are resources that the city accumulates over time to facilitate projects. There are a lot of needy projects around town, but it's a potential candidate for Rule 20A undergrounding work. So before these trees become too mature, the younger ones. And I think that's a consideration that we would want to think about as we move forward.
Is your company equipped to do the aerial
inspection?
Yeah.
We would need a bucket truck, but absolutely, I do these periodically.
So in terms of direction, which is what staff is looking for, we think
Is the city buying a new bucket truck? Will it have bucket on the what we approved earlier? Put it to use.
So if we look forward in terms of direction towards creating the plan, the further assessment, and then creating a plan, is that what I'm hearing from the council? Where we're
Yeah, I mean, maybe the staff could come back to us with a recommendation for the next steps, whether it's to keep working, with this group or what we should be doing next.
Do we have any urgent actions to be taking right now? You recommended a removal of 7 trees and some other pruning. It seems that more urgent. This plan is going to develop over a fair amount of time, but maybe we need to have some short-term goals and some long-term goals here. And I'm kind of concerned.
Absolutely.
Got a couple lawyers up here on the council, like, okay, when you
Absolutely.
start mentioning the target, I get worried.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree that there are 7 trees recommended for removal, if I recall correctly. 3 of those were high risk. Those would be the trees that I would focus my first efforts on and work my way down that list. So let me also say that the imminent failures, there were 2 branches that were broken and hanging over 29 that I contacted the city about, and those were taken care of. So I'm less concerned about immediacy, but certainly I would start with those trees that were recommended for removal that were high risk.
Thank you. If I can answer your concern, is that we actually have identified 2 trees already with Caltrans, and they're scheduled to remove those. They gave us a window at the beginning of the year that they will solidify between February and March. That's prior to us showing them this. I think if we show them the other trees that John's identified, that scope can increase to the 4 trees. They're all for it. So that also addresses us meeting with Caltrans. So I think once we have direction, definitely meet with them. Our intent was to show them this, let them review it, meet out in the field, identify the other trees, and then have them add it to their removals.
By the way, now that I have you here, the report indicated that we are watering the new trees weekly. Is that pretty consistent weekly? Because I drive to Calistoga and back every day.
Yes, we actually
see a lot of dryness a lot, and so I don't see people out there. Maybe they're earlier or after, but it's pretty consistent weekly.
Pretty consistent.
Okay,
we have a water.
That's good to know.
Water log that we actually maintain, right? That indicates how much water we've been giving. And speaking of watering of new trees, again, John briefly touched on incorporating new methods. Right, so it says it on the full report, water bags or gator bags, I think they're called, right? So we would try to incorporate that for our younger trees, and then again phasing that out by the third.
So I think it's important for the community, this idea of a plan. So if we are taking out trees, that we're helping the community understand why we're taking them out, and that it's part of a larger plan to create a long-term healthy grove, so that all of a sudden there's not missing trees and people saying, hey, that's the end of the story. It's like that's just part of the story.
Right.
And I think it's up to us to put the plan together and help communicate that to the community.
I think everyone's kind of touched on it as far as what we had thought of going once we were given this report, which is definitely reach out to HortScience to help us develop a schedule, a scope, around what should be our next programs, and then put hard dates behind it. Okay, by such and such date, these need to be addressed, and concurrently working with the elm tree management plan. What it's missing, it's lacking quite a bit, right? It's just a historical document. So what parts of these can we incorporate to that? So if it means a whole new document, or just, again, that was a draft. So that's kind of in our favor. We can then solidify it by including some of the recommendations and protocols.
Good. Any additional comments? Thank you very much. It's most appreciated. It means a lot to this community. Thank you.
Carry on.
Okay. Thank you, Carlos. So we will move on now to item 10.2. This is discussion and direction regarding process options for decisions related to civic building site selection, construction, and financing options, including unfunded stormwater and streetscape improvements, and consideration of a resolution to memorialize the City Council's preferred approach and desired scope mission. And this is prepared by Priya and Priya, I'm sorry. And the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. This tonight continues a conversation that we started on November 4th in a special workshop. That workshop discussed formulating a decision-making framework to guide these important community discussions related to our civic institutions, including storm drains and downtown streetscape. And at that meeting, the council requested that the staff bring back options for the use of local citizens with subject matter expertise in finance, real estate, construction, and architecture to provide recommendations on issues related to site selection, the buildings, phasing, financing, etc. And council also provided direction to the staff to develop some draft evaluation criteria to look to the city's vision and mission statements, the SHAPE evaluation criteria, the city's 3-year goals, and council feedback that was provided at that meeting. And so attached to this report is a draft of some possible evaluation criteria. And we've also brought to you 3 options that all utilize what we're referring to as a citizen task force. And tonight I want to walk you through a couple of each of these options to describe how they might work. And these are concepts for you to react to tonight. And so what we'll be looking for, first we'll talk about the citizen task force options. It will be very important if we decide to move forward on something like this to clarify the scope of this work precisely and to identify specifically what the recommendations are that the council would seek from this process. Secondly, we also want to talk to you about possible structures, what this might look like, and the appointment process. So in terms of structure, for example, the staff report refers to a 5 to 7 member task force, and then an appointment process, which really could begin tomorrow through a recruitment process over, for example, a 2-week period where we ask for citizens with that subject matter expertise to submit their interest and some background to the council, with a possible interview before Christmas and a possible appointment that evening or sometime in early January for both. In terms of timeline, each of the 3 options essentially estimate that work would be completed sometime between today and the end of March. I think that's a guesstimate. It's something that's certainly something that can be adjusted or may need to be adjusted. I mentioned the criteria, and we've attached to the staff report a draft resolution that has the opportunity to implement either of the options that are described and can be modified if there are adjustments that desired by the council. So on the next slide, we have duplicated what's in the staff report, and if I may walk you through each of the A, B, and C options here. Option A is essentially a citizen task force of these subject matter experts. It would be this group would be appointed by you in some form. We are recommending that you follow the process that's identified in your rules of procedure, but certainly you can adjust that process. This task force would be subject to the Brown Act and required to meet in public. We would anticipate each of those meetings would occur on a Wednesday or a Thursday in this room. We would videotape those meetings. The meeting frequency could be weekly. This should read semi-monthly, weekly or semi-monthly, so every other week. It does require, each of these options is going to require some staffing, and the hire only refers to the idea that if it's a weekly group, that's essentially 4 additional meetings on top of the 2 council meetings that we clerk and administer each month. But for a short duration, I think it's a lift that we've demonstrated we can do, we've done in the past, and we can do again. Option B, again, similar selection process we're anticipating for each of the 3 options. But option B would be a workshop series where the individual subject matter experts would sit with you in the meeting. you would have an opportunity to walk through, and what I'm imagining is we would walk through a series of important questions that relate to site selection, phasing of buildings and investments, funding strategies, and ultimately producing the clarity you need to advance your decision making regarding these assets. We are anticipating the meeting frequency for the workshop series would be semi-monthly, so every other week for a period of 2 to 3 months, describing that as a medium staffing requirement. Option C, the ad hoc plus workshops approach, would consist of an ad hoc committee where the council would identify 2 members of the council. You would recruit the 5 to 7 member subject matter panel. The ad hoc committee could meet with a non-quorum component of that task force 5 days a week, 7 days a week if they wanted. The expectation would be that the 2 members of the council ad hoc, informed by the subject matter experts and availability of those resources, would develop some recommendations or options for the full council. And when that group was ready, and this is something that could take a short amount of time or longer, but when that ad hoc was ready to meet and provide full recommendations to the broader council, we would schedule a series of community workshops. We're identifying the idea of at least 3 of those. That's a concept. We're looking for your reaction to that, whether that's enough or whether you would expect more. It's only referred to as a lower staffing requirement because the staff's formal work with Brown Act meetings would occur after the ad hoc develops its recommendations based on the work that they would do. So the ad hoc could not meet with the task force as a whole. They would have to meet with a non-quorum component. So is that if it's a 5-member group, they could meet with up to 2 one-on-one. If it's a group of 7, they could meet with up to 3 at any one time.
Makes me dizzy.
In the staff report, under option A, there's an attachment that describes a draft scope. And if you would like, I can walk you through that, but it essentially itemizes the various components of what we would expect that group to work on. So part of it begins with a little bit of background by reviewing the September 17th, 2018 report, which led to the prioritization of the civic building assets. So you focused on 3 with the idea that was to limit the number of concurrent projects, helped us manage the workload moving forward, and led to the adoption of the civic infrastructure strategy that we're following today. We would expect that this group would consider the evaluation criteria that we would expect you would adopt to help guide their work. There would be a review of the Nolan TAM cost estimates and the rationale that led to some of the recommendations that they have put together for the city council. We would want them to review information related to the downtown streetscape as well as needs for our underground storm drains. We anticipate in each of the configurations here that there, and we heard a lot of feedback at the last meeting on November 4th, that there is going to be an expectation that as we update the long-range financial forecast, we update it to include various options that anticipate either a new hotel or hotels coming online, when costs or obligations of construction would occur, some of the soft costs that will be a part of this project, including the architectural work. So we want to fold those in and provide you and the task force with information, and we would anticipate working closely with them. I've added some specific recommendations that would be helpful for the staff to receive formal clarity on. So this is the important work that we would be asking of either an ad hoc or an outcome of a public workshop series or an outcome of a citizen task force, but information related to site selection of City Hall, prioritization of facilities and projects, funding strategies, and I've added a bullet point that relates to the police department needs. And so this bullet point speaks to consulting with the city manager and the police chief to discuss potential alignment and or synergies related to police department needs. This is just to ensure that we don't overlook the needs of the department. We have separated that on purpose until now, but I'm bringing it to you because I think it's time to begin folding that back into some of the decisions. And depending on where City Hall would be rebuilt, I think it also produces options related to how we meet the police department needs, and then other recommendations related to architectural design. And there are 2 additional attachments that relate to the workshop series concept, as well as the hybrid ad hoc workshop series approach. So if we go back to the prior slide and maybe toggle between these 2, this is intended to help us organize the discussion tonight, and the plan will be to just toggle back and forth as the questions arise.
So with that, is there any initial council comment?
Go to public comment.
Questions, right? Not comments.
Questions, yeah.
I need some clarification for the B and C option. So for B, it's the semi-monthly with the full council in attendance, so an extra meeting.
This would be an extra 2 meetings for the council each month for a period of 2 to 3 months.
Okay.
Joined by a 5 to 7 member panel where you can ask them questions related to their subject matter expertise to help guide a series of decisions that you need to make or may want to make related to how we invest in these civic assets.
Okay, and then the C option is that same task force with 2 council members, the ad hoc, and those 2 council members are meeting as much or as little as they want with either 3 or 5.
So the expectation on C is that the ad hoc could meet more frequently. They could meet literally every day of the week,
but not with the whole task force.
No, they would need to limit their communications to, let's say that there are 2 subject matter experts that have construction and architecture experience. Those 2 they would meet with as often as they needed to develop ideas, receive feedback on questions in order to help inform recommendations that they would make to the full council. If there was a finance person or people on that committee, they would need to limit their conversations to no more than 2 if it's a 5-member body, or 3 if it's a 7-member body. If there was a desire for, really this is something that we can do in this process. It's not wait necessarily for the full body to come together. You could have a series of kickoff meetings with a full group, it's kind of a hybrid, and then send an ad hoc off to meet with subject matter experts to drill down on a couple of additional issues, and then come back to the full council at a later time.
And then everybody's together for the community workshops, those at least 3? Right,
and I think if the council, for example, set in motion an ad hoc, the expectation would be that the ad hoc would develop some thinking, refined by the use of the citizens and subject matter experts, and then provide that recommendation to the council. And you would have the option of having these resources available to you to answer questions that you have about the options and recommendations that the ad hoc would be making.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions at this point? So I'm going to open it up to public comment. Is there any public comment?
Hi, I'm Tom Allen, live on Madrona Avenue in St. Helena. And I just want to comment on, I think that we've made some great progress since this issue was raised 2 weeks ago in terms of developing the scope of work for this task force. And I just want to reemphasize what the city manager said about the importance of setting the mission and scope of the work of this task force and the specific recommendations that you would like to get out of it. And I see a little bit of an inconsistency between the purpose of the task force as written in this draft resolution and what it is that I think you really want this task force to do. And specifically, I'm very encouraged by paragraph F that's in the scope and mission, which incorporates a review and recasting of the long-range financial forecast and including water and wastewater into the overall financial picture of the spending that's ahead of the city. And also, I see that you've included financial strategies and revenue options in paragraph F, which I applaud. However, I didn't see that carried forward into paragraph G, where you're asking for recommendations to the City Council. So I don't know if it needs to be wordsmithed tonight or it could be like discussed later by the council or by the committee or the task force as you set it up. But I believe that paragraph G should also include consideration of revenue options to go along with the spending options that you're also looking at that relate to all of the civic structures that are contemplated, plus water, plus wastewater, plus pension obligations, plus set-asides for public safety and other things that are coming down the pike. So that would be my thought, just to reiterate. I think it's very important that the scope and the mission and the desired recommendations be set forth for the task force, whichever of these three options you select. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any other public comments?
Hey there. Dan Hale, 1616 Madrona. I applaud Tom's comments. I think they're pretty dead on. I'd also like to just give a shout out to Susan Kenward's thoughtful letter that was in the kind of general comment section on this meeting. And I think to me, the most kind of encouraging word of the day was sort of long-term economic development strategy. I think that aspect of that needs to be folded into this whole consideration. And it kind of just gets back to the whole sort of master plan thinking, and just how I think there's a large group of people in town who really feel like that piece of it needs, for this to be effective, that needs to be included, and we have to head on face the aspects of workforce housing. We have to head on kind of face what pieces we're protecting, what assets we're protecting, and how any of these moves lift the entire ecosystem here. As to the options, I think my thinking, just kind of seeing the way these things have gone, the option B looks most promising to me, just because it, as much as it demands a little more on your end, I think it would likely dampen the potential brush fire aspects of things happening, that it's going to be more transparent. It's going to, and I think it's going to most effectively address this sort of holistic input sort of thinking that I think needs to happen. So I don't get a vote, but option B just looks most reasonable to me, and I think it has just fewer pitfalls. So I think it's a matter of getting the set of right questions and getting obviously the right 5 to 7 masterminds together that that aren't, wedded or pre-wedded to any sort of any particular outcome, and can fully consider the varied pieces that they need to consider. So, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there additional public comments? Seeing none, I will close the public comment, bring it back to the council. Do we have any thoughts, comments at this point? Pardon? Oh.
We're deciding which of these three.
It may be helpful for us to start with one of the other bullet points besides A, B, and C, but happy to start with A, B, and C.
So one of the things that was brought up was the use of a facilitator. And would that be consistent through A, B, or C? Is the thought?
A facilitator could be used in in any of the three options. And I have given some thought to who, you have a lot of options related to facilitation. If it's a citizen task force, it could be the chair of a task force, or it could be a third person, an additional person that facilitates this. In terms of the workshop series, the natural facilitator would be either the mayor or the city manager, but it's the staff report does include a recommendation to consider the use of an outside facilitator. I've had a conversation with a recently retired finance director who became later in his career an assistant city manager, who today is a part-time consultant to local government, who I think could be an excellent facilitator for some of the process, whether it was desired for A, B, or C. And that person is indicated, they live in the Northern California area, and they are available, likely to assist over a 3-month period. It would include cost of overnight travel, most likely, because it's a decent drive after an evening meeting back to the Bay Area. But there are others that may not have the same subject matter expertise, but have facilitation expertise that you may prefer instead of someone with a municipal finance background. I think the municipal finance background is an advantage, and that's why I thought of that individual.
I thought that the SHAPE committee worked out pretty well. It was grueling for them, and they were basically option A. They were the task force model, and each council member had the opportunity to go watch any meeting. If more than 2 of us showed up, we couldn't talk because of the Brown Act, but I thought it was a good model. I hesitate to get into B or C because I think that beyond setting this group in motion, maybe at a kickoff meeting where we talk about what the work is and what we want them to do, I really don't want the heavy hand of the council in all their work all the time. And I would be happy to just let them, once we've given them the charge, let them move forward. I would add that if they're meeting every other week and we're meeting every other week, there's also a tremendous opportunity for whoever is the chair of this meeting to come and report to us of exactly what's going on if we are not, heavily involved. So I think as far as a facilitator, I think we have to decide, what are we going to use that person for? In the SHAPE process, it was when we did really get into some heavy workshop testing alternatives, and I think that's kind of to be determined. So my preference would be to go with option A, and we start by giving them a lot of information like we gave the SHAPE committee so they can digest all this background information, and then, give them the task and let them go from there.
So I didn't realize that distinction. What you're saying is with option A is we're not there, but it would still be every other week.
It could be weekly or it could be every other week.
I think every other week, just for the people involved and also for staff. With everything else that we have going on and just getting up to speed with the new planning director and your projects, Erica. I'm okay with A as long as it's every other week.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
I'd sort of imagine something that was more ad hoc-y, but, I wasn't thinking. I mean, shape was great. Fantastic. I wasn't thinking this in terms of shape. I was thinking it more in terms of advise and consent, and I'm just worried about the time requirements for a citizen task force for the citizens that we'd love to have participate.
That is why I thought ad hoc too is just that flexibility of having the kind of people that we want to get involved. With the ad hoc, I saw that as an advantage for being able to meet in smaller numbers on the subject expertise and not sit through those long meetings if it's not your area.
And just a comment on the ad hoc concept. If a council creates a body, and the city attorney can help me if I start to stray, but if the council wants input on who these people are and creates and identifies who those people are, they become a Brown Act subject body. And unless they're meeting in groups of less than the quorum, they can't meet together. And so the work, the alternative to that would be the staff selects those, and I don't think that's what you're asking for. I think the council would like the opportunity if there's interest in tapping the talent of our citizens. I think the council's expectation is that the council will be the group that picks those people, and I think that's appropriate. But some cities, an alternative is that the staff would identify who those people are, and that's not really what we're recommending tonight. What we're recommending is the council selects the subject matter experts based on some form of an application process that solicits interest and as well as background on their specific talents.
If I could add just one more thing, I think there's two different concepts of ad hoc. There's an ad hoc council subcommittee, and then there's, I think, the ad hoc use of subject matter experts. And it's possible to get there under option C with a little bit of a variation. But again, I don't think it's exactly what the council may be looking for, which would be for the council to form an ad hoc subcommittee of 2 council members who would meet from time to time as much as they wanted to talk about these issues. Those 2 people would then be the ones who are basically deciding who else to talk to and who to seek input from. And so it would be the ad hoc committee's discretion as to who to talk to. It wouldn't be the entire council's and it wouldn't be staff's. So that's a way to get it completely ad hoc-y in Councilmember Knudsen's words.
Mr. Doring, do you have any thoughts?
I guess my initial impulse is that my sense of it is that we need to subordinate ourselves to experts, subject matter experts, and not really be involved in their tasks. We put them to work because they're the experts. Why have them and we're sort of interacting with them? I'm inclined to favor option A. I think that meeting twice a month would be fine. I foresee them taking these experts in the community, also receiving expertise from other experts, public finance people, other, maybe more of Nolan Tam, those kinds of things, and receiving testimony, and at the end writing a report that consists of recommendations. I think these meetings will be attended. We call it a meeting. We can call it a workshop too under option A, right? If we happen to have somebody from a public finance company talk in general about these things, that would be a workshop. So I agree. We don't want to overtap our citizens, and I'm thinking, twice a month, maybe 3 times a month if the scheduling kind of doesn't work out perfectly. But I don't really want to get involved in micromanaging the outcome of what this task force is to do. I think it's purer and more useful for us to get the information in the form it comes without us sort of I would totally resist the option C where we had folks interacting all the time. I feel very uncomfortable with that. I'm looking at my time too, frankly. So I would probably end up attending a lot of these meetings anyway, as I did with the SHAPE committee, just sitting there and kind of enjoying the interaction. So I'm in favor of option A. I think we need to subordinate ourselves and give the group sort of room to do its thing. I think we should. I would be in favor of the council selecting the chair. They can select the vice chair, but I think it's important for us to figure out who that person is going to be. That's very important from my experience in being involved in government and all kinds of different task force over many years. I think we need to be really honed in on that issue. So I kind of agree with Mary for the reason she stated. I have other comments about other parts of what was said in the audience, but I'm leaning to the just a citizen task force, call it whatever you want, in terms of public meetings. Yeah.
Thank you. I think Ms. Koberstein, I think that was an excellent point, that the heavy hand of the council pulling away. I think Paul reinforced that. The creation of the task force, I guess that's what we'll talk about, the process for that. The choosing of the chair, I agree that the council should be making that choice. I want to make sure that however we structure this, that staff's time is balanced and not thrown off the other things we're trying to do. So thinking about how it's structured that way, also time-wise, so that we figure out what the period of time that this task force is going to be engaged, so that we don't extend. So I'm supportive. I'm supportive of Ms. Koberstein's points and Mr. Doring's. Are there thoughts? Yeah. Any other comments at this? Okay. So I think looking at A is where we're headed. Mr. Prestwich, any thoughts at this point?
My only comments: don't make them do as long of a report as we'd had to do on SHAPE. That's not fair.
I think brevity in this exercise. I mean, I think if we look at what SHAPE did, which was incredible, a lot of information, but I think we need to be more truncated, if that's the word.
And so is the idea that we would nominate a chairman and then just let them run with it? Is that the idea that's in front of us?
I don't know what you mean by let them run with it.
Well, within whatever the constraints are, but that we're not going to find members. Members are going to, the chairman's going to select them or something, or, I mean.
Well, I think we're going to have to emphasize, yes, I think that's right, but I mean, we have to hone in on the scope of the work and what they're going to be looking at and sort of the content maybe of the report that this group writes.
And presumably this group would be open to getting input from, just like the SHAPE committee, they wandered around, they talked to people, they met with people.
But I think maybe what you're saying is that the chairperson is selecting the group. I think we're thinking that
No, I didn't think that at all.
We're picking the group,
Right.
And among that group, we're choosing the chair.
Okay.
Rather than the group choosing the chair.
So my only concern about this is that I think some of the experts that I'm hoping that we have a chance to hear from will not want to participate in the heavy time commitment that option A will require. And so I'm just hoping that even if they're not in the task force, that the task force will be open to meeting with folks who are experts and have expertise. That's all.
No, please.
I don't think
I
we
agree. I think people should be able to come to these meetings and give their input to the extent that they can. I think the more the merrier. We have a lot of talent in the community. So if they're not able to serve, they can serve in another way by offering their expertise during these meetings. So I wouldn't want to preclude that at all. But I did want to emphasize that I do think that the council should select all members and the chair. I didn't mean to suggest that the chair would do that. So I apologize if I was inaccurate there. Sorry.
Yeah, was that one of the bullet points of the selection process or whatever, wasn't it? I mean, I would be in favor of doing what we always do. You know, we will get the advertisement out and have a meeting. Maybe there is something a little more specific on this application form of your area of expertise, or something that really talks about what the purpose of this committee is when we get to clarifying the scope, so that people know what they're in for and what the time frame is and how they would participate. But I think we would do the same sort of interview thing like we usually do, and maybe 5 to 7 people, so it doesn't become overwhelming.
I think that's important too, that we keep it in a manageable range of people.
Try to cover the various bases, finance, whatever. But I can't quite see how we would even appoint these people until maybe January, really. I mean, we have the holiday coming up right now. We have one meeting in December. I think it would be good to spend our time collecting the information the group is going to need, and then maybe getting the word out so people actually know that this committee is formed and they can apply for it, and that we would make those appointments early in January.
When we looked at the calendar, it's a tight fit, and it's one of the reasons that when we met on November 4th, I indicated I would anticipate having this conversation in a public workshop, but with a lighter agenda and timing issues, we decided to add that to tonight's agenda in order to not lose momentum on this. When we look at the calendar, if we released the application process tomorrow and provided a 2-week turnaround, it would provide you an opportunity to interview people a week before the Christmas holiday week. That's a tight timeline. A longer process would allow us more time in case people are already traveling for the holidays and not able to learn about this opportunity until the following week. And I think to address Councilmember Knudsen's comments about the availability of some of the talent, one option that we could add to the application process is a button or an option for someone to identify that they're a subject matter expert that would like to participate and be available to be called upon as a resource periodically, but not a sitting member of the task force. So we could solicit that talent, and the application process could distinguish between people that would be available for simply that purpose, and the council could also let us know who some of those people are that you're thinking of, and we could add them into the mix so that when we bring the task force together, those people can be called upon as a resource. And I would add a bullet point to, or an item to, the specific scope that the task force would be expected to confer with these subject matter experts on the various issues.
Oh, I'm sure they will. Hey, I am shocked that we're not meeting on December 24th, because I can't think of something that would be more fun to spend Christmas Eve in a public meeting. What? We
With 3 votes, we can change that.
No, I have tradition. Okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're clear in the communication that this isn't another shape and then steering committee, because I think there is a feeling out in the public that is, wait, what? You guys are you're asking us again to talk about all this and not just making a decision? Why more? And I think we're doing more because you had brought up this idea of getting community experts and wanting to do that. But I'm just, now that we're doing shape again. So I want to make sure that we're clear that it's not, but make the case in all of the communication why this is different and how this is now, because we're figuring out how we want to pay for it, and going more into the financial and the scope is different. But when we were starting to talk about this again, that is what's going through my mind.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, we are not doing shape over again. That isn't my idea of why we decided to do this. We had some very thoughtful comments that we really ought to look at our financial capacity as we are getting ready to make choices. And so I think it's very important to narrow the scope to exactly what it is we want them to do. I don't know that that they should be making recommendations about site selection unless something comes up that relates specifically to a financial issue. Like, let's take the City Hall, for example. If it's on Library Lane as opposed to the City Hall property, then there is a question of, well, does that open up the City Hall property as a source of revenue that might fit into the whole picture? And I think that's relevant, but I think we have to make some of these choices, and they can weigh in on whether they think that from a financial perspective we're coming up with a good solution or it's a bad idea. But I think we need to narrow the scope. What is it that we want? And I agree with Tom's comments. When we get to that one, I think I'll say a little more.
But I think site selection for replacement of City Hall is important to understand in the whole picture, especially now that we're adding the police back in. And what my point was that we did shape, and people have come back and said, well, why aren't you just moving forward with the shape recommendation? But then we also did the next stage, which was the steering committee, and they built on the work of shape. And we're looking at the information we had then from hiring Nolan Tam, who did all the engagement as well. That was part of the contract. And we had new information, and we made decisions as a group looking at that whole, all of that information. And now we're asking this group to look at the whole again with more financial information.
Yeah, I guess it's not my position that we're asking them to look at the whole again. I think it would be very beneficial to this group if maybe at our next agenda we did actually agendize a discussion of our reactions and our thoughts about what we saw and heard from Nolan Tam. We didn't really have a full-blown discussion of what we are thinking now that we've seen massing diagrams and we've seen numbers. And I think it would be worthwhile for us to have that kind of discussion and maybe, take a look at this criteria that we've kind of developed and try to work it out ourselves and explain to the public what we're thinking at the moment and why, and where we're thinking we might go. And then I think it's up to this committee to really weigh in from the financial side. What is our capacity to do these things?
What would, I'm sorry, just a question to follow up to clarify for me. What would be, in your mind, the purpose of having architects on the task force?
I'm not certain there is a purpose. I think this is a very financial and maybe a real estate development expertise area. I think there's certainly going to be a role for architects as we get into actual design and drawings. But right now we're just looking at boxes, size of space. So I'm not certain that we need that discipline, but I'm open to hearing.
It may lend to the financial conversation, just somebody who's familiar with that arena as an architect. Their background may add to that conversation. I agree that this task force is about how we finance, but it may be that discipline of an architect as it relates to building and finance may add something to the conversation. But
Mr. Mayor, I mean, also, I thought it was sort of fascinating, sort of Nolan Tam's perspective on the massing, and it might be nice to have, there are architectural experts that could provide some, that live in town, great architects that could provide some further sort of feedback and assessment. That's a financial consideration, and it'd be great to have those folks involved, I would think.
So I agree with that. I think we have to have the mind of the architect. I think there's the benefit of having this cross-pollination where you're having different disciplines really interacting with each other. I think they're going to enjoy it more rather than having their own. I do understand Mary's point that it's not really so much the selection, but there are other issues with respect to these buildings or potential buildings, the massing issue and those kinds of things, which I think really need to be refined much more and have much more input. So that's not so much a selection of where they go, but I think that conversation is important to have.
Yeah, and I think we could have that at our next meeting. I mean, I have some, in the architectural realm, had some reaction to the massing that I saw, and I would have some questions and some thoughts about it. I think once we figure out what the scope of the work is, and then we advertise and people come and tell us what their discipline is and how they think they can be helpful, and then we interview them and make the selection. I'm not ruling anybody out, but I think we definitely need finance, and we need some understanding, I think, of development.
And I think to Ms. Chateau's concern that we're entering another shape, that we don't want to go down that road, that, as Mary says, if we narrow the scope now, as we get closer to decision-making, then my belief is that we won't go into a longer open-ended circle, but we'll be narrowing the scope, and it'll help us as we get closer to decision-making.
Okay. It's less shape, more we're asking for another committee, more feedback. That kind of thing.
Limited feedback.
Yeah.
And feedback that would be helpful, particularly at this stage, right? So we have options. And so there's options around municipal finance, there's options around the property that the city owns, there's options around, so now we need to open it again to sort of look at options, I would think.
Yeah, I think the distinction is I don't think we're asking this committee, do you like option 3A? Do you like 3B? Do you like 3C that Nolan Tam presented? No. The answer is what's out there that's available to help us finance and pay for this? What are the limits? That we're not, I don't think we're asking them specifically to comment on site selection unless they think it's relevant to the financial piece.
Ms. Copperstein, that is a great way to frame it. So let's listen to the tape. That's a great way to frame it. That's what, in our December meeting, sadly not the 24th, we should. We
have a regular December meeting coming up yet. One more.
No, I know. I'm sort of teasing, but.
Well, in the, Mr. Mayor, if I may, under the functions in our proposed resolution on page 3, there is functions of the task force. So one of them, there's several listed here, but under B it says review and provide recommendations on Nolan Tam's cost estimates and the 4 configuration options it presented to the City Council during this November 12th City Council meeting. I kind of like that, but I think we might want to add a little bit of more language in there. And the 4 configuration options as they relate to, and then
yeah, I don't want to
always crunch your face when I talk.
Well, I don't want to get too hung up on the options as they were presented, because remember there was Mark's famous comment that this was plug and play. I mean, we have a general feeling for what the buildings are going to cost, and in my mind, how we put them together or how we figure out how to build them is going to depend in large part on the financing.
I just don't think you can have the conversation intelligently without at least having some basic understanding of what these buildings are.
Yeah, and
the options are. Not site selection, but just the buildings, sort of the size, sort of the uses, that kind of thing.
I think that goes to sort of the beginning data that we give this group. I mean, of course, if they didn't watch the show, we would give them the Nolan Tam report. And basically, so they understand the background and understand why the buildings were sized the way they were and what the cost figures are.
I'm very interested in whether they think City Hall should be over there on Adams or on the current site. I would think if they're meeting and they're looking at that, that's what's on here. I think that would be very helpful.
It does relate to, I think there's a financial aspect to site selection. I think that does.
That's why I want to know.
Yeah. So I think them analyzing the financial aspects of the different sites, how that plays into it. But if what we're looking for are options for us, right, we're looking for options for us to be presented, and so they can vet those options, looking at it, if the site's here, if the site's there. To me,
It's nuanced. I don't necessarily need to have someone say, "Hey, it's best to go here." I want someone to tell me the advantages and
It's more
disadvantages, right?
The data behind it and
Right.
why. That's why I thought we were doing this, for the financial piece.
Yeah, for example, I mean, the recommendation might be to build two of the buildings at once because there's a way you can package the financing for it and it'll be cheaper in the end, or something like that is sort of what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I agree with that.
That kind of guidance. I could make a financial argument about why the city hall should be one place versus the other, and I think, they could certainly do that, but I'm not expecting them to endorse a particular package that we got.
I think it's important that they don't that they're presenting us with these options, that this is what this looks like, this is what this looks like, this is what this looks like. You're the council. Where do you want to go?
So it's more information on the options. Okay.
Any thoughts? So do you feel you have direction?
No.
Okay.
I think we should talk about what information they should get. We compiled a lot of information for the SHAPE committee. I know there's an interest in them working through the long-range financial forecast. I don't know what your timing is. I do think it's important to make it a little more helpful to this committee. Right now, the long-range financial forecast has a number at the bottom, which is sort of the net unassigned number. And we have certain policies that we have decided. For instance, we're going to pay down the PERS over a certain time period. And I think it would be useful if you revise the long-range financial forecast to have more line items. And I think it should have that. I think it should have the reserve number, and then you get your new, which I believe is 30% is our current policy.
Yes.
I thought that it would be important for us to resolve this question about site selection, whether that's going to be in or out, before we move on to the other things. But I think that's where we're stuck, right?
On G, right, just to bring it back. Right now, G, provide recommendations to the city council regarding, and then there's bullet points. I'd like to stick with the ones that are in there, and then I'm open to the comment that was made about connecting back in F, right?
I'm just bothered by the 4 configuration options language in there. I think.
Where's that?
Yeah.
Why don't we just take out just say, instead of 4 configuration options, just say the options?
Where is that, Mary?
In B, where it says review and provide recommendations on cost estimates and the 4 configuration options. I mean,
Mary's looking at the resolution. I think you're looking at the staff
I am.
report.
I'm looking at the
so
staff
that's-
report.
Yeah.
I'm thrilled and excited that we're going to have some input from financial thinking from people in town that actually know stuff. We know stuff, and staff knows stuff, but it'll be great to get some additional feedback and input, which is perfect. Whether it's coming,
So you're looking at G?
option A, citizen task force. Is that where we're looking right now? We're in the resolution.
We're in the resolution. No, we're in the staff report.
We're in the staff report. I have to bet
They're
that.
not consistent.
No, they're not.
That's the problem.
So the C, review Nolan's town cost estimates and the 4 configuration options, and what's suggested is to just say the options.
Maybe we should just work through the staff report and then you can fix up the resolution accordingly. I think I'm creating confusion by looking at the resolution.
So under A, I think it's just good background for any task force member to see, to understand the history of this. B is there's an expectation that the council will develop some evaluation criteria in advance of this group. C is essentially what you received already, but we would probably want to build in an opportunity for Nolan Tam to meet the task force and be available for questions, so we may need to amend a contract. The downtown streetscape we have good estimates on now that we're prepared to share, along with a explanation of some timing and phasing of those improvements. The underground utilities master plan estimates are going to be more of an educated guess at this point because we don't have data that's as refined as the streetscape numbers. And then in terms of the long-range financial forecast, I do anticipate that we will be able to layer on a number of different items to that forecast. And I know that there are other tools there was a tool that the SHAPE committee used that Tim Neiman used that was actually quite good that he may be willing to share with us to toggle back between different options. In terms of G, this is where it's really critical for us to make sure we understand your direction so that we produce a resolution and a subsequent report that asks specifically what you want this group to do. And I would encourage you to refer to them as a task force, not a committee. I do think it's important to distinguish this work from the SHAPE committee. And when I look at this, as I think more about it and I listen to your conversation, I do think that this group, while it has a construction and architecture component, there really is a financing element throughout this that, to the extent we were using the term civic institutions task forces, essentially a placeholder, but something of the finance variety may be a better or a more suitable title for this group, this task force. And I would encourage us to think about that as a description, because it really, the work that's happened since the SHAPE committee includes additional thinking about site selection issues. It does include additional analysis by staff on options related to interim spacing, and we have really good options for you there. It also includes refined cost estimates. So if you remember, we were talking about initially $300 a square foot. With public input, that grew to $600, and now we know the construction cost alone is $1,000 a square foot, and then add on the soft costs of 30% and the other markups and the costs associated with programming this out to 2022 and beyond. So we have much better data to make financial projections and look at options for how we finance this. And we've also received a lot of independent information between the SHAPE committee and now on different ways of financing improvements. In terms of the structure, it would help me also, I guess it would be, first I should go through this list. Site selection for replacement of City Hall, is that something you want feedback on, that we would write into the responsibility of this group if they're perhaps more of a financing analysis group?
Yes, for me.
I'm back to my comment that I think they can comment on site selection to the extent it has an impact on financing. I mean, I think it would be helpful if we would have a discussion of where we think we are, how we are reacting to what we have, so that they have the benefit of understanding what we're thinking. But I see this as a finance project primarily.
And I see it as I want to know what we can afford to be able to talk about what we can pay for.
Which includes site selection.
Right. That's what I'm saying. That's why I want the information.
And I think as it's written, or how we write it, so that site selection related to finance, however, how the wording needs to connect, that we're interested in the discussion of site selection as it relates to how financing could occur. So that there's a relationship.
Yeah, to me, the most important bullet point here is the third one. You know, what are the funding strategies that are related to all this and to the phasing and the impact on city finances? You know, and then maybe the second one, are they going to have us suggestions about phasing or whatever?
Mr. Mayor, could I have a motion to move beyond 9 p.m.?
Oh, yes. Is there a motion?
Nobody wants to keep talking? I'll move we extend for another 15 minutes. Should we start with that?
We have a second?
I'll second.
Councilor Coperstein?
Yes.
Shuto?
Yes.
Knudsen?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring?
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth?
Yes.
We can clean up the language in bullet points 1, 2, and 3 and tie it in with F. There's some duplication, I think, here that we can clean up and refine. And I think I'm hearing that there's an interest in site selection as it relates to the financing strategies. And I think there's language in F, consider timing and scale of various improvements. That's important. Revenue options, financial strategies, bringing that back into G and isolating the long-range financial forecasts. I'm interested in your feedback on the concept of adding in a conversation related to the police department needs at this point. I think I can tell you that I've thought about different alternatives for that department, and some of it depends on site selection. So I think there are ways that the police department gets folded back into buildings in multiple locations, and I can see other alternatives as well. But I think it's something that we shouldn't overlook as we start to refine the decision making on replacement of City Hall, because replacement of City Hall will then require us to think through options on the police department.
Yeah, so I think better to think about it now. I like that it's in there.
I think it would be good to know, I don't know where we are with the current discussions we're having with Calistoga, but when in the timeline would, and as I understand, the temporary thing is to maybe park them over on Railroad for a while. Is that still the current?
That's one option.
Okay.
And
So
depending
it's
on
not as though they are going to be homeless. If we would, demolish the city hall, or maybe we just leave the city hall standing and they just stay there. But I think it would be important to know at what year in the timeline there's likely to need to be a decision, and also just to have some understanding of the magnitude of the cost. And this might be something Nolan Tam or somebody else can give us, but I think those buildings tend to be even more costly than the dollars per square foot that we're looking at for the others. And it's an important number to remember.
Have you noticed at the Chase Bank building the amount of effort that they put into building the vault? It was open to the public. I mean, you could see through the walls, here's the vault. And essentially a police department has a person vault as well as other secure facilities. So I'm sure it's the same sort of care and attention, right?
So keeping that on the table now and in the conversation, I think is important.
Okay, and I wrote it in a way that hopefully was a little bit flexible for all of us. And then architectural design. Are you interested in feedback from this group related to architectural design?
Yes.
It'll impact costs, right?
I think it's important, but I don't want to lose focus on the financial aspects. I mean, to me, getting into a discussion of aesthetics, I want to make sure that we're staying focused on finance. Aesthetics play into that, but I want to make sure in my opinion, the conversation is weighted towards what we're looking at in terms of cost.
Sure, but just building materials and what kind of architect we end up selecting, and all those sorts of things play into it. Absolutely, right.
Are there other bullet points that are missing that you're thinking about that we should incorporate?
I would like to see a narrative report without votes on various items of concern, just a narrative report, maybe with a minority position if that's necessary, but taking votes on various nuanced ideas, I think it really is probably not as productive as just the narrative, the words. That's my opinion, but
And when we did the votes in SHAPE, there's a lot of talk about this isn't a vote. This is just getting a general idea of who supports something. It wasn't supposed to rank it, as far as I remembered. It's been a while now. So now with time, it's coming out stronger that it was a vote, or I'm hearing that when you see the numbers on paper. And that wasn't the conversation that we had during SHAPE about those numbers.
And this is option generation anyway. I mean, that's the point, right? So hopefully the report will say, hey, you could do this, or you could do this, or you could do that. And so then guess what?
So you've addressed the next sentence in here related to minority perspective recommendations, and as long as there's really not a vote, there's not a concern about inviting that other perspectives that may not be reflected in the narrative that's produced. In terms of the task force structure and appointment process, do you have a preference for 5 or 7?
Thoughts?
I think we should try to shoot for 7. We may only get 5. Who knows? I just want to make sure we cover all the disciplines. I think that's the strength of a body like this, having those different disciplines meeting together. If one discipline gets left out, then it really weakens the recommendation. These are very talented, thoughtful, knowledgeable people, so you would think it would be in our best interest to try to get as much information for free as possible. These are, invaluable resources that we have. So I would try for 7. People are very busy. I'm busy. A lot of us are tapped out in terms of our commitment, so I get that. So I would at least try to shoot for 7 and live with 5.
Can we accept people from outside the city, or is it, or not?
A legal question?
Oh, if it's a legal question, the council can, if it wants to. The way that the resolution is worded is that applicants should be St. Helena residents, although the council reserves its right to appoint members who do not reside in the city.
I think we should just reserve that right and see who applies.
I think so, too.
I think we're talking about a limited time frame here, a pretty big commitment from people, and I don't even know who's going to step up. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's people that think that they live in the city until you check those lines. So, and we could want them on this.
So I just want to circle back quickly to what I said a moment ago in terms of the aesthetics. I think that's critically important, but that's not what this task force is assigned to, in my opinion. That's a discussion that we're getting a general financial picture here, and then after that, there's more room for the aesthetic consideration. So I don't want to dismiss the aesthetics. I just want to, in my opinion, this task force is more focused on how we're going to finance. I just want to make sure
I agree. I think one thing that could be relevant is maybe if there was more information about what is the basis for the Nolan TAM estimates, and what did the cost estimator, what were the norms or whatever that were used to develop those costs, this, that, and the other thing. But yeah, I don't think we should get off onto design. That's like the next step.
That's how I feel. It's like this is this, and then that will be the next.
How about though an approach to the design?
Yeah.
Because there's all kinds of approaches, right?
What do you mean?
Well, how we go about selecting folks to design these buildings.
That's a good. Yeah.
I mean, there's a process there. I don't know. I just don't want to leave that out altogether.
Yeah, no, I think you're right.
No, I
Right.
think that's a good point.
This is setting the table for that next. And so we have the discretion to appoint somebody from outside who lives outside of city limits if we as a council believe that's so. Okay.
The appointment process, we have council protocols that speak to this. There's been some comment about the council's interest potentially in appointing the chairperson. The protocols expect that the body itself would appoint their own. And I'm interested in some specific feedback on whether you're comfortable with the nomination process and whether you would like to also appoint the chairperson based on your review of the applicant pool.
Any thoughts?
I've already expressed my opinion that I think we absolutely should appoint the chairperson. It's critical. That person is going to be able to guide the whole meeting and get to the end with a written report. And not everybody has the ability to facilitate meetings.
And my thought is that is the critical role, is facilitating the meetings and putting the information forward, not necessarily guiding the committee or pushing an agenda, but mainly to run the meetings, facilitate the meetings, and come up with the options and the material we're looking for. So can we keep that option open? Is that a way to look at it? We keep the option open to a point?
Mm-hmm. I'm welcome to listen to other perspectives. Is that going to be considered demeaning or disrespectful? I don't know. Maybe it is. I'm not intending to have it that way. I just, I don't know. I mean, is there a process where in the application papers people could express an interest in that, or where we kind of go, this is why, and I have some experience facilitating meetings? I don't know. I mean, I guess we want to maintain objectivity as much as possible. I really don't want to insert myself into who that person is, but I think it is important to have somebody with those skills. Those are really, that's an expertise in and of itself. Being able to facilitate a meeting and getting to the end where you have a written report and you're trying to sort of herd all these folks, and that's going to be difficult to herd different opinions into a final written report. And that's a special person. So that's my take.
So the draft resolution does provide that the council reserves its right to appoint a chairperson and vice chairperson. And if the council doesn't do so, then the task force would nominate those two positions. So you could leave it like that and provide yourself with some flexibility.
And it could be part of the criteria that we put out to the public that is a skill that would be welcome.
On the application process, we also, I raised the idea of whether if someone's not available for 3 months of meetings, but they would be available on a given night to provide some specific feedback to a task force. Are you comfortable with the idea that we structure a draft application that includes a box to check for someone that may not have the full time available, but still would be willing to lend their expertise?
Yes.
So we try to capture those names.
Sure.
And
Although I wouldn't limit it to those. I mean, people could show up to the meeting, right? So.
Right. Absolutely, and these will all be public meetings.
But I think they're more likely to come if we invite them and they're a part of this process like that, in that way.
I raised a question about a facilitator, and you've talked about a chairperson with facilitation skills. Do you have any interest in meeting, interviewing, considering a facilitator to support this task force?
I'm not sure it's necessary. I mean, it's unless we're going to get into a lot of public workshops or something like SHAPE did. I think a group of 5 or 7 people, professionals, can, take the task and do it without somebody sort of running the meeting for them.
It may be thinking ahead, looking for possible pitfalls. If we do have trouble getting a body that's able to manage itself, having the option for a facilitator, to keep that as a potential. As we get closer, we may see that a need, and so not having to jump in at that time and figure it out. But if we look ahead.
Yeah, we could have somebody in our back pocket if we need.
Yeah. And I like the idea of having the government, the finance background that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that part may add considerably to this. So.
Okay. And then we did have a reference in the staff report. I don't think it's noted in the draft resolution, but there was a reference to potential additional community engagement, and if there's an expectation of the council that the task force engages in some form of additional public engagement or not, it would be helpful for us to have that feedback.
Can I just go back just for a minute? Sorry. To the facilitator, if they have municipal experience, it may be that they can come at the beginning to help set the group off in the right direction with some things that, if people come from the private sector, have a different understanding of how finance works. So it may be a facilitator that's not there for the whole thing, but just helps get the group up to speed. Maybe a way to have a benefit without the full-on facilitator. So that's just a thought.
Okay, I'll think on that. I'll chew on that a little.
To me, having the public meetings, these are all public meetings, it seems like that's the chance for community engagement. I mean, it's finance. It's not design of a downtown streetscape. It's, I think there'll be plenty of opportunity for the public to participate if they so desire, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's...
Can I just say, could there be something, though, at a different time? Like something more like a coffee at Carnegie, or something that people could stop by that wouldn't come in the evenings to this building, just to have people have another chance, different time of day?
Yeah, I think maybe this application form should ask these people when they're generally available for meetings. We're assuming everybody can meet on a Wednesday and a Thursday night. Maybe there's a Saturday morning session or something. I think we should sort of check in on their availability.
That makes sense.
Can we return to the scope question that Mr. Allen raised? I mean, I do think it's important to shine the spotlight on revenue generation. Where is the money going to come from? What are the strategies? And so I think we should give them the information we have so far. Maybe Ken Deeker can boil down his thing into something that's really specific to what they're doing. And I did ask for you to distribute to people a piece that I found that was pretty helpful about public-private partnerships. Maybe at the next meeting we could talk about the kind of information we're going to give to people, and what we're going to provide them with to start their work. But I did think that Tom asked an interesting question, which is, we should be asking them to forecast, assess our revenue producing potential. And based on that, then we can make the decisions of what we're going to do and when. So I think that the resolution and the scope of work has to address, like he said, not what should we build and where should we build it, but what do we have the capacity to do, and in what time frame?
Yeah, and there's almost a meta question though, Ms. Koberstein. It's also, we've put in some sort of wish list stuff, and we've heard from some community members that the wish list isn't actually wished for. Library expansion, potential separate parks and rec facility. There's been some questions about, like, do we really need that? And so the option should also be a different, like, hey, we're capable of doing this, and within that we recommend this sequencing, but honestly, these sorts of things, does the community want it? There might be some questions about that. And those are financial questions.
No, I agree, and I think if we're able to have a further discussion at our next meeting, I think the kind of unknown piece of this is, frankly, the library. And, perhaps we should be inviting the library constituency and somebody from the Board of Trustees and the Friends and Foundation to come and, tell us what they want and what they feel. Because I don't have, myself, a good feeling for it. You hear different things depending on who's talking at the meeting. And it may be something that we end up having to poll on, because right now I don't really have a strong feeling for where people want to go. And it obviously would make a difference.
Mr. Mayor, it's 9:15.
So I think we're getting close, but I will look for a motion to continue for another 15 minutes.
I move that we continue for another 15 minutes.
Second.
Okay.
Councilmember Shuto.
Yes.
Koberstein.
Yes.
Hudson.
Yeah.
Vice Mayor Doring.
No.
Mayor Ellsworth.
Yes. Okay, so where are we getting?
I think I have clear direction to bring back a report and itemize this on the next agenda. That's December 10th. We will update the staff report to reflect tonight's discussion. We will update the reso as needed to reflect tonight's discussion. And it's going to be a little heavier agenda, which tends to happen at the end of the year. But we'll work on managing that agenda so that we can incorporate this discussion. And it probably won't need as much time on the 10th. So my expectation would be that I also build in a recruitment process that would begin before Christmas, stretched probably through the first week of January, and then allow for some interview process that follows within a week later, and an updated timeline that reflects the changing in appointment timing, so that you have a feel for how we might see the schedule unfold. And we have direction to look at an every other week meeting series. So we'll refine the report and bring you something back on the 10th of December.
Very good.
Okay. So is there an interest in having a discussion at the next meeting, maybe 15 minutes of our reactions to what we saw and what we're thinking? Is that part of what we would be doing, or no?
That's something on my notes.
Or do we kick off the year with that? January 7th.
I think we should do it at some point. I mean, we had all this information dropped on us, and I think we should articulate what we're thinking. If we have questions about any part of it, we could do it later, but I think we should do it.
I agree we should do it. And I'm thinking if that first meeting in January, as we get out of the...
First meeting in January is on January 14th. Would it be helpful for you to also have Nolan Tam present for that discussion? Okay. So the first meeting would be January 14th unless we scheduled a special meeting.
Okay.
Okay. So you have everything we need to go forward here?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you, everybody, with that.
Just one quick
Yes.
question. Any feedback on the name at this point, or we can work on bringing you some names that maybe incorporate revenue and finance more than civic institutions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. With that, I will adjourn the meeting. I appreciate everybody's work. Thank you.
What? I didn't want to.